Hoovering, the comeback trap. They said they've changed. They miss you. They remember the good times. And a part of you wants to believe them. But what if this is just another performance in the cycle of manipulation? They ghosted you once. Maybe multiple times. Each episode ended with you feeling a mixture of relief and heartbreak, determined to move on and rebuild. You told yourself this was it. The final break. The swirl of doubt and self-blame began to settle. And then, just as you were discovering fragments of your old independence, your phone lit up with a hauntingly familiar message. I miss you. This sudden reappearance is classic. The manipulator's attempt to suck you back into their orbit, much like a vacuum cleaner snatching up anything within reach. One day, they dismiss you or treat you like you're disposable. The next, they dangle seductive promises or contrite apologies, reawakening old hopes. Hoovering can be heartbreakingly effective. It preys on the tenderness that lingers even after painful experiences, capturing your attention with the faint possibility that a hallmark of hoovering is its timing. It typically happens when you start to regain your footing. Perhaps you've begun to see friends more often, or your anxiety has waned enough that you sleep through the night without replaying old arguments. This manipulator senses your growing distance, sometimes through mutual contacts or social media updates. Then, like clockwork, they pop back into your life with an emotional hook. Sometimes it's an apology. I've been doing a lot of soul searching. I'm sorry for everything. Other times, it's nostalgia. Remember our trip to the lake, how happy we were. Or it might be a crisis plea. I need you. Things are falling apart for me. Whichever approach they choose, the underlying goal stays the same. Re-establish a line of communication and reel you in before you can fully detach. In a healthy relationship, conflict or separation can resolve with sincere dialogue, remorse, and positive change. But hoovering often mimics that process without the follow-through. You may hear the right words, regret, longing, even empathy, but once you step closer, you might discover the same old patterns of manipulation. We're prone to give second chances, especially if the original bond felt profound. A part of you still wants to believe in the love story you once shared, or the friendship that ran deep. So when they reappear with a glimmer of humility, you let your guard down. You think, or in truth, they've studied your vulnerabilities and know precisely which heartstrings to pluck. Hoovering can create emotional whiplash. One moment, you're healing, telling your closest friends you're done with that toxic dynamic. The next, you're scrolling through old photos, rereading conversations, and feeling pangs of longing. This abrupt reversal can leave you disoriented. You might question whether you blew things out of proportion the first time, or worry you'll regret not accepting their extended hand. Manipulators rely on these doubts. By fostering confusion, they pull you back into a state of emotional dependence, even if the hoovering tactics are transparent, like a text that says, I can't live without you. After months of total silence, you might cling to the idea that a grand romantic gesture outweighs the old hurts. Not all hoovering attempts are wrapped in sweet words. Some come disguised as anger or jealousy. The manipulator might lash out if they hear you've moved on, accusing you of betrayal. I can't believe you're already seeing someone else. Clearly you never cared. That emotional outburst can still tug at your guilt or sense of obligation, drawing you into conversation. Alternatively, they might pop up with small acts of kindness, like dropping off a birthday gift or offering to help with a project, hoping to spark fresh warmth without ever mentioning the past. Hoovering isn't always about heartfelt reunions. It can be about regaining control or fueling an ego. Knowing you still respond to their calls or texts provides the manipulator with a sense of power. They remain a central figure in your emotional landscape. Sometimes, once they confirm you're still hooked, they disappear again. This pattern repeats in cycles, each time leaving you more disillusioned. In certain group settings, like a cult or a high-control environment, hoovering can extend beyond a personal relationship. A former member who departed may suddenly be showered with messages from old friends or leaders, expressing love and concern. The group frames this as welcoming you home, but in reality, they're reasserting influence. They claim to have seen the light or drastically changed overnight. True transformation usually takes consistent time and effort, Even as they ask for another chance, they subtly imply you contributed to the problems, or they downplay past hurts as misunderstandings. They paint a picture of reconciliation, but provide no real plan to address the underlying issues. They might push you to decide right away, as if you owe them immediate forgiveness. Genuine remorse respects your need for caution. When you sense hoovering, grounding yourself in reality is key. Reflect on the reasons you parted in the first place. Has anything genuinely changed? Are the issues that pushed you away truly resolved, or merely swept under the rug? Don't let a wave of sweet words bury the hard truths you've learned. Setting boundaries can save you from renewed heartache. That might mean blocking numbers, ignoring texts, or politely but firmly declining invites. If the manipulator escalates, guilting or shaming you for not responding, it confirms you made the right choice. Real love or friendship doesn't insist you tear down your boundaries without showing any real willingness to grow. Talking openly with trusted friends or a counselor can also break the spell. They can remind you how far you've come, or point out patterns you might be too emotionally invested to see clearly. Sometimes hearing your own story out loud is enough to solidify your resolve. One of the strongest lures in hoovering is hope, a yearning for the person you once believed they could be. If only they'd heal or adopt the empathy you saw glimpses of. It's tough to abandon hope, especially if you've built shared memories or have a deep emotional history. Recognize that while you can hope for someone's growth, you're not obligated to remain their test subject. True change shows up in consistent actions, not fleeting reconciliations. Ultimately, resisting hoovering comes down to trusting the lessons your pain has taught you. If repeated experiences have shown the same destructive dynamic, it's unlikely a single heartfelt text will shift the entire foundation. You can wish them well from a distance, maintain your self-respect, and continue investing in the life you've started to rebuild. In the aftermath of ignoring a hoovering attempt, you might feel a bittersweet ache. You're refusing to partake in a fantasy that once held you captive. Over time, though, this choice becomes liberating. You reclaim your emotional energy, recognizing that your future doesn't have to circle back to past wounds. Hoovering thrives on the fragility of transition, on your lingering memories and unhealed scars. It's a trap designed to pull you into an old script, one where you play the role of perpetual forgiver, supporter, or enabler. Each "I miss you" or "let's try again" can sound heartfelt, but if the fundamental dysfunction remains, you'll be stepping onto the same merry-go-round of hurt and fleeting hope. The real power lies in stepping off. No matter the lengths they go to evoke nostalgia or remorse, you are the sole gatekeeper of your boundaries. Deciding to keep that gate closed until you see genuine sustained change, or perhaps indefinitely, is an act of self-preservation. Hoovering can't ensnare you if you stand firm in the lessons you've learned, the progress you've made, and the truth that your well-being matters too much to be sacrificed to an endless loop of departures and comebacks. Meanwhile, your nervous system grows accustomed to surges of adrenaline followed by relief. This biochemical roller coaster can mimic intense passion, convincing you that what you share is deeper than ordinary relationships. The fear, the danger, and the tearful reconciliations morph into a twisted sense of intimacy. Escaping a trauma bond starts with recognizing the patterns. One of the hardest steps is admitting that the person offering salvation is the same one orchestrating the turmoil. To rebuild clarity, it helps to keep track of events in a journal. What was said, how conflicts arose, how they ended. Over time, you'll see how cyclical the abuse-apology dynamic truly is. Reaching out to external sources of support can be life-changing. Confide in a trusted friend, family member, or therapist who isn't entangled in the bond. They can offer an unclouded perspective, something you might not be able to generate on your own while immersed in the emotional storm. Even online support groups or hotlines can validate your experiences and help you see you're not alone. It's vital to rebuild a sense of self-worth outside the manipulator's influence. This might involve reconnecting with old hobbies, reconnecting with people who genuinely care, or simply carving out time for self-reflection. As you begin to reclaim your identity, you'll find it easier to spot how the abuser's words and actions conflict with your well-being. Trauma bonds don't dissolve neatly. It's common to feel an urge to go back or to respond to hoovering attempts, those tearful messages saying they've changed or that they can't live without you. Your longing for those good times can flare up, overshadowing memories of the chaos. Recognize this as part of the withdrawal phase. Like any addiction, you might relapse momentarily, especially if the manipulator dangles the promise of a fix, the sweet version of them you still yearn for. If a relapse happens, avoid beating yourself up. The cycle is cunning, and healing is rarely linear. Return to your support network, revisit why you left, and remind yourself that every honeymoon phase in the past eventually gave way to the same harmful pattern. Over time, these realizations become anchors, helping you resist the emotional pull. Once you fully break away, you might feel a strange emptiness where drama once filled your days. It takes time to relearn what peaceful relationships look like, ones not fueled by extremes of love and terror. You may need therapy to unpack the lingering effects, flashbacks, self-blame, or distrust toward new relationships. Patience is essential, but the moment you step outside that painful cycle, you're already reclaiming a world where kindness doesn't come wrapped in fear. Is the paradox of feeling tethered to someone who repeatedly harms you, the product of a twisted dance between cruelty and fleeting comfort? It's grounded in the chaos of unpredictable affection, trapping you in a cycle of suffering and relief. From the outside, it might appear like irrational devotion, yet from within, it feels like clinging to the one constant in a world turned upside down. Realize that the same presence that causes you to flinch shouldn't be your source of comfort. The same voice that belittles you cannot offer genuine solace. It's not love if it thrives on your scars. If you find yourself trapped in this cycle, know that recognizing it is a powerful first step. Healing is possible, even if the path forward is challenging. You deserve consistency, respect, and a sense of safety that isn't followed by dread. Cutting free may ache, but in that ache lies the seed of a new beginning, a life guided by real care, rather than the false refuge of a bond forged in trauma. Trauma bonding. They hurt you. Then they hold you, and somehow, you can't walk away. This isn't love. It's trauma bonding, where pain becomes the glue. You're wrapped in a whirl of emotions, an intense connection that feels indispensable, yet somehow fraught with dread. Friends might question why you stay. Rationally, you can list the injuries, the heartbreak, the quiet terror of the next outburst. But leaving seems impossible, even when your mind tells you it's the logical choice. That paradox of being tied to someone who hurts you sits at the core of. At first, there was a lure. It may have come in the form of kindness that felt almost too perfect, lavish compliments, unwavering attention, or heroic gestures when you were at your most vulnerable. You believed the closeness was real, as the two of you seemed to share a unique bond forged by mutual secrets and confessions. Yet somewhere along the line, the dynamic shifted. What was once supportive became controlling, or even frightening. Moments of kindness persisted, but they intermingled with bursts of cruelty, leaving you both reassured and distressed in turn. This oscillation between tenderness and torment anchors trauma bonding. After every episode of anger, betrayal, or abuse, the manipulator often morphs into the ideal partner again. They apologize tearfully, offer grand gestures of remorse, or cradle you in their arms, promising they'll never hurt you like that again. Those sweet moments revive the original spark, the dream version of the relationship you once clung to. You tell yourself, but soon another blow arrives, maybe another harsh insult, another incident of physical aggression, or a betrayal you never saw coming. Despite it all, you keep returning, convinced that if you can just endure the storms, you'll be rewarded with the tenderness you crave. This is no accident. In psychological terms, it's a pattern layered with high-stakes emotional stress. Your brain latches onto the fleeting glimpses of affection with heightened intensity, especially under threat or fear. You become chemically addicted to those rare good phases, even though they're sandwiched between episodes of pain. Imagine someone trapped in a labyrinth. Each time they stumble onto a small exit sign, it vanishes, and the labyrinth grows darker. Then, out of nowhere, a helpful hand guides them to a well-lit chamber. That relief of being saved from confusion bonds the trapped person to the guide, even if the guide was partly responsible for building the labyrinth in the first place. This paradox explains why victims often remain attached to their abusers. The one who causes the harm also appears to be the source of comfort, intensifying dependency. This mechanism isn't limited to romantic relationships. It can manifest in abusive families, cults, or workplaces. Cult leaders break down followers through fear, isolation, or humiliation, then shower them with validation or privileged insights. Over time, members feel indebted and loyal, believing this group or leader is their lifeline, never recognizing that the same hand orchestrates both suffering and solace. From an outside perspective, it can seem maddening, but to someone in a trauma bond, leaving feels like severing a lifeline. You've been conditioned to believe that nobody else understands you, that this person, despite the pain, cares in a way no one else does. When the abuser begs forgiveness, proclaiming love or empathy, you want desperately to believe them. Each episode of harmony renews your hope that the relationship can be healed, that the good version of them can prevail, if you just stay a little longer. Your own sense of identity can become tangled up with the abuser's view of you. Over time, you may doubt your ability to function without them, or you fear retribution if you walk away. Some manipulative partners fuel these fears. "No one else will ever love you like I do," they say, twisting your insecurities into chains. The unpredictable cycle of cruelty and comfort also keeps you psychologically off balance, making it hard to objectively assess your situation. Trauma bonding frequently intertwines with, where the abuser systematically undermines your sense of reality. After an explosive fight, for instance, they might claim you provoked them, or that it never happened the way you remember. Add to this the cycle of remorse, tears, gifts, promises, and your perception blurs. You start to mistrust your own memories. If they're your primary confidant, you lack an outside perspective to confirm what's truly happening. Guilt tripping. Manipulating with the weight of blame, they never raise their voice, they don't have to, because guilt, carefully placed and constantly stirred, does all the work. Welcome to the quiet manipulation of guilt tripping. It often begins with a simple remark that seems so innocent, a sigh, a softly spoken, "I can't believe you'd do that," that slips into conversation like a whisper. At first, you may think it's just a fleeting moment of disappointment, but then it becomes a pattern, a constant reminder that you are somehow responsible for another's unhappiness. This is guilt tripping, a tactic where the manipulator turns your natural empathy against you, transforming concern into a heavy burden of self-blame. Imagine a conversation where every word is carefully measured. You might share a small personal victory, only to be met with a remark like, "I wish you'd put that same effort into our relationship." In another instance, after a minor disagreement, instead of discussing what went wrong, they emphasize how much you've hurt them. "You never think about my feelings, or because of you I feel completely alone." Such statements are designed not merely to express disappointment, but to insinuate that you are the root of all their pain. Before you know it, the simple act of sharing your day becomes a minefield, where every mistake, even an unintentional one, could spark a cascade of guilt. The art of emotional leverage. Guilt tripping exploits our intrinsic desire to be good, to be caring. Most of us strive to live up to a standard of kindness, to be the person who can be trusted not to cause harm. But when someone turns that virtue against you, they effectively hold your conscience hostage. You begin to wonder if your actions, however small, have been the cause of their suffering. Gradually, the manipulator's words start to echo in your mind, overshadowing your own judgments. Instead of feeling empowered by your ability to choose, you feel compelled to apologize, even when no real offense has been committed. This psychological tool works by creating a false dichotomy. On one side, there's the image of yourself as a caring, moral individual. On the other, there's the overwhelming notion that you have failed in that role. When the balance tips, you experience a deep, nagging unease. Have I really done something so wrong? Every time you attempt to assert your perspective, you're met with a flood of "but you always," or "if you truly cared, you would." These phrases corrode your confidence, and bit by bit, force you into a state of perpetual self-reproach. Subtle shifts and escalations in the beginning. The guilt might come in gentle doses, a remark that seems almost like constructive feedback. But over time, it intensifies. The manipulator might start recalling past events, twisting them into evidence of your supposed failings. They say, "Remember when you forgot our anniversary? That hurt me deeply." Or, "You never listened to what I need." I always have to remind you, these aren't isolated incidents. They become a litany of grievances that you're expected to carry. With each recalled mistake, the weight of guilt grows heavier until you feel as though you are permanently indebted to them. The power of guilt tripping is that it rarely offers you a chance to defend yourself without feeling like you're dismissing their pain. Every time you try to explain, your words are reframed as further proof of your neglect. The conversation morphs into a self-perpetuating cycle where your apologies become a currency for restoring harmony, a currency that you're compelled to spend again and again. Soon, saying "I'm sorry" is not just a response, but a reflex, even if you're not entirely sure what you're apologizing for. Everyday examples and red flags: consider a partner who habitually reminds you of every time you were thoughtless or selfish, as if each misstep is a scar on your character. In a friendship, it might manifest as constant reminders of favors done or times when you were unreliable. In a family setting, a parent might subtly suggest that your inability to meet their expectations is the source of their constant disappointment. These tactics are not about solving a problem. They're about shifting the entire weight of responsibility onto your shoulders, making you feel as though you are perpetually at fault. Red flags in guilt tripping often include excessive emphasis on past failures, bringing up long-forgotten mistakes repeatedly, one-sided accountability, never acknowledging their own shortcomings or contributions to the conflict, emotional blackmail, using guilt as a weapon to force you into compliance, often by suggesting that your lack of remorse will result in severe consequences for them, inescapable self-doubt, making you question every decision, no matter how small, to ensure you remain on guard. The psychological toll living under the constant pressure of guilt can erode your self-esteem over time. Jealousy as control. My jealousy is my love. It began with, "I just worry about you." Now you're counting your smiles, checking your clothes, and shrinking your world to keep them calm. That's not romance. It's control dressed as jealousy. There's a peculiar intensity in the way some people wield jealousy, a fiery passion that they claim is proof of their deep affection. In moments when a partner's protective gaze turns possessive, it can feel as if love itself has become an iron chain. This is the art of using jealousy as a tool of control, where every "I'm jealous because I love you" is a covert command to limit your freedom. It might start subtly. A casual remark like, "I just worry about you when you're out with your friends," may seem harmless, but gradually, that concern deepens into a gaze that scrutinizes every interaction you have. Soon, comments evolve into overt warnings, questions about who you're speaking with, where you've been, and even what you're wearing. The phrase "my jealousy is my love" becomes their refrain, a seductive justification for behaviors that slowly encircle you like a tightening grip. At first you might be flattered by the intensity of their feelings. After all, who wouldn't want someone so invested in every detail of your life? Yet as days pass, the warmth of admiration curdles into something more ominous. Their protective instincts morph into a means of control, an unspoken rule that your actions must always reassure them of your loyalty. Every missed call, every friendly laugh, becomes a potential betrayal in their eyes. In this dynamic, jealousy is weaponized. It's no longer about care, it's about domination. The partner insists that their jealousy is a sign of love, a proof that you mean more to them than anyone else ever could. But underneath that passionate claim lies a more insidious reality, a desire to isolate you from anyone who might capture your attention, to tether you so closely that even the smallest hint of independence is seen as a transgression. It's a subtle form of imprisonment, one where your social connections and personal interests are slowly trimmed away, leaving you confined within the boundaries they set. Imagine waking up to find your inbox full of texts asking, "Who were you with last night?" or receiving social media messages questioning every photo you post. The manipulator may not always shout these doubts. Sometimes they are delivered in a soft tone cloaked in concern. Yet the effect is the same. You begin to second-guess your interactions, censor your conversations, and modify your behavior to avoid igniting their jealousy. Gradually, your world narrows. What once was a vibrant circle of friends and hobbies shrinks into a carefully curated life that fits neatly into their vision of exclusivity. This control through jealousy isn't just about limiting your time, it's about seizing your autonomy. When every outing or conversation is preemptively critiqued, You start to internalize the belief that your freedom is a threat, not a right. Their constant surveillance and veiled accusations make you doubt your own intentions. The more they insist, "I'm just protective because I love you," the more you question whether your own actions might indeed be irresponsible or reckless. Slowly, you begin to let their doubts override your own judgment, and your confidence erodes beneath the weight of their possessiveness. What's striking is the emotional manipulation that underpins it all. The partner's jealousy is presented as an expression of deep passion, a badge of honor that signifies how much you're cherished. But this performance has a price. It conditions you to seek constant approval. You may start to hide parts of yourself, censoring your opinions or even curbing your aspirations, simply to avoid provoking a reaction. Instead of thriving in a relationship where mutual respect and trust are paramount, you find yourself trapped in a cycle where your worth is measured by your adherence to their insecurities. Consider the daily minutiae that can become battlegrounds: texts that take too long to reply, calls made in a group setting, even a smile shared with a stranger. In a healthy relationship, these moments are ordinary, a part of life's rhythm, but under the shadow of controlling jealousy, they're dissected and transformed into evidence of potential betrayal. The partner's interpretation becomes the sole narrative. If you can smile freely at someone else, what does that say about your loyalty to me? Such questions, draped in the guise of concern, can create a persistent undercurrent of anxiety that infects every aspect of your life. This tactic is insidious because it cloaks control in the language of love. The manipulator rarely admits to their motives. Instead, they rely on the social expectation that love is inherently possessive. You're told that true love demands exclusivity, that to care deeply is to fear losing the object of your affection. And so you might rationalize the restrictions, believing that a little jealousy is normal, even desirable. Over time, however, the line between genuine care and suffocating control blurs until it vanishes entirely. Breaking free from this cycle starts with reclaiming your right to individuality. Recognize that while a spark of jealousy can be a natural human response, it should never become a tool for domination. Your autonomy is not a threat to love, it's the very foundation of a healthy relationship. Reasserting your boundaries means having honest conversations about trust, about the importance of personal space, and about mutual respect. It may be uncomfortable at first to challenge the notion that my jealousy is my love, but it's crucial to understand that love in its healthiest form encourages growth rather than imposes limitations. Seeking support from trusted friends or a counselor can offer perspective, helping you see that control disguised as passion is not love at all. When you surround yourself with voices that affirm your right to live freely and authentically, you can begin to dismantle the walls of possessiveness. This external validation reminds you that your value is not contingent upon satisfying someone else's insecurities. Ultimately, true intimacy blossoms in an environment of trust and freedom, not one shadowed by constant surveillance and unfounded accusations. Love should be a sanctuary, a space where you can be yourself without fear of judgment or restraint. When jealousy becomes a weapon, it transforms affection into an instrument of power, leaving you confined and uncertain. Recognize the signs, and remember that your individuality is not a flaw but a strength. Embracing that truth can set you on a path to a more balanced and genuine connection, one where love isn't measured by control, but by mutual respect, trust, and the freedom to flourish as your true self. Emotional withdrawal. The penalty of unresponsiveness. No shouting, no arguments, just distance. The kind of silence that makes you question everything. This isn't peace, it's emotional withdrawal, a quiet form of punishment. Imagine a warm embrace that slowly fades into a cold, empty space. In the beginning, there was connection, a sharing of laughter, gentle glances, and whispered secrets. But then, gradually, something shifts. Instead of addressing conflict, the other person retreats behind an impenetrable wall, leaving you adrift in a silence that feels like an emotional exile. This is emotional withdrawal, a tactic where the absence of communication becomes a deliberate punishment, a way to enforce control without uttering a single word. It starts in subtle ways. Perhaps during a minor disagreement, you notice a sudden drop in energy, a once vibrant conversation now punctuated by long, heavy pauses. Their eyes no longer meet yours, and a habitual smile dissolves into a tight, unresponsive line. What was once an open dialogue turns into a barren landscape where only your questions echo. There's no fury or confrontation. There's only a chasm of unspoken disapproval that grows wider with each passing minute. Unlike overt arguments filled with harsh words, emotional withdrawal leaves you guessing. You may replay the conversation over and over, trying to pinpoint what triggered the retreat. Was it something you said, or perhaps something you failed to say? Each moment of quiet builds a tension that suffocates, making you feel isolated even when you're together. The withdrawal isn't merely an absence of dialogue, it's an active distancing, a signal that your presence is no longer welcome, or worse, that it has become a burden. In this dynamic, the manipulator's silence becomes a weapon. They don't need to condemn or criticize openly. The mere absence of acknowledgement is enough to wound. When someone you care about stops sharing their thoughts, stops engaging in your shared world, you begin to question your own worth. You start wondering if you did something wrong, if your actions have driven them away. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back not your true self, but a version marred by doubt and self-reproach. Emotional withdrawal is particularly insidious because it disguises itself as a need for space or a moment to cool down. It might be framed as "I need time to think," but when those moments stretch on, the promise of resolution evaporates. Instead of a healthy pause, you're left with a void where reconciliation should be. The person who once shared in your joys and sorrows becomes a ghost, their warmth replaced by an icy detachment that communicates more than any harsh word ever could. This strategy isn't random, it's a calculated move to maintain power. By withdrawing, the manipulator forces you to bear the burden of fixing what isn't openly acknowledged as broken. You're left to interpret the silence, to fill in the gaps with your own fears and insecurities. Over time, you might find yourself apologizing repeatedly, trying to coax a spark of connection out of the unyielding coldness. The more you strive to bridge the distance, the deeper the withdrawal seems to become, creating a vicious cycle that leaves you emotionally exhausted. Consider a scenario where, after a disagreement, your partner ceases all communication for hours, then days. No phone calls, no texts, not even a passing glance. You're left with a mounting anxiety. Each minute of silence intensifies the feeling that you're somehow at fault. The withdrawal isn't an isolated event. It becomes the default response to any tension. Slowly, your own emotional responses begin to mirror this pattern, and you may start to withdraw as a protective reflex, distancing yourself to avoid further hurt. In this way, emotional withdrawal doesn't just create distance between you and the other person, it can erode your ability to connect at all. In other settings, such as workplaces or family dynamics, this form of silence can be equally damaging. A supervisor who routinely avoids feedback, or a family member who refuses to engage during conflicts, creates an environment where issues are left unresolved. The unspoken disapproval festers, breeding resentment and misunderstanding. Without open communication, even minor issues can escalate into significant barriers, undermining trust and cooperation. What makes emotional withdrawal so painful is that it often feels unearned. There's no visible justification for the cold shoulder, no overt attack to defend against. It's a punishment delivered in the form of neglect, a refusal to validate your feelings or acknowledge your efforts to resolve the issue. And because it's silent, it leaves you with no clear path to repair the rift. Instead, you're left to navigate a labyrinth of self-doubt, where every unanswered question deepens the wound. Breaking free from this oppressive silence requires a willingness to reclaim dialogue. It starts with recognizing that the withdrawal is not a natural, healthy need for space, but a strategic avoidance. Begin by setting clear boundaries. Let the other person know that while you respect their need for a pause, prolonged silence is not an acceptable way to handle conflicts. Express that you value honest communication, even if it's uncomfortable, because true resolution can only emerge from mutual exchange. Seeking support outside the relationship is also crucial. Talk to a trusted friend or counselor who can provide a perspective that isn't clouded by the emotional fog. Sometimes, an external voice can help you understand that the silence you're enduring isn't a reflection of your worth, but a tool of control. They can remind you that your feelings deserve to be heard and validated, not left to wither in a void. It may also help to document your experiences. Keeping a journal of when the withdrawal happens, how long it lasts, and the context in which it occurs can help you see patterns that you might otherwise miss. Over time, this record can empower you to confront the behavior directly, armed with the clarity of a timeline that shows how your communication has been systematically undermined. Ultimately, healing from emotional withdrawal means restoring your right to be seen and heard. It's about breaking the cycle of isolation and reclaiming your emotional space, where silence does not equate to punishment. You deserve relationships where conflicts are resolved through shared effort, where both parties are willing to express vulnerability and work together to mend the fractures. In such environments, pauses in conversation are moments for thoughtful reflection, not tools for manipulation. In the quiet aftermath of prolonged withdrawal, as you rebuild the foundations of open communication, you may rediscover the joy of genuine connection. It's a gradual process, one that requires patience and resilience. But with each small step, a conversation that isn't stifled by silence, a conflict resolved through honest exchange, you reclaim a part of yourself that was nearly lost. You learn that your voice is not a source of disruption, but a vital element of the relationship that deserves to be heard. Emotional withdrawal, when used as a weapon, seeks to control not through loud declarations, but by erasing your presence from the conversation. Yet the very act of speaking out, of demanding clarity and connection, can be a powerful antidote. By refusing to accept a default of silence, you assert that your feelings, your thoughts and your worth are non-negotiable. In doing so, you carve out a space where genuine dialogue can flourish, and where the bonds of understanding replace the chains of neglect. In reclaiming your voice, you take back the narrative of your life, one where every word matters, and silence is no longer an instrument of control. This is not just about healing from a moment of withdrawal, it's about redefining the way you connect with the world, ensuring that your inner light shines through, unshadowed by the darkness of unspoken reprimand. Love bombing. When affection is a weapon. What if I told you that some of the most romantic gestures you've ever dreamed of might actually be red flags? Let's talk about love bombing, and how something that feels like love can turn into control. It starts like the sweetest dream you never knew you needed. Suddenly you're the center of someone's universe, a sun radiating a light they claim they've never witnessed before. Every text feels like a revelation, each phone call like an unexpected holiday. They praise you in ways that leave you reeling. No one else understands me like you. I've never felt such a deep connection. You're everything I've been waiting for. At first it's intoxicating, lifting you to a state of euphoria. But behind that facade of endless devotion, there's a trick, a dark psychological tactic known as, think of it as the manipulator's opening act. A firework show of praise, warmth and dramatic gestures, all orchestrated to strike quickly at your defenses. Leaders of manipulative cults do this all the time, showering newcomers with attention and belonging, so intense that recruits stop asking questions. In toxic relationships, a partner might adopt the same tactic. They overwhelm you with confessions of eternal love, lavish gifts and non-stop messages that radiate devotion. You're caught off guard, but it's too mesmerizing to resist. Who questions love that powerful in the early days? Yet the difference between healthy infatuation and love bombing is sharper than it looks. Real affection respects boundaries, grows at a pace that acknowledges each person's vulnerabilities, and leaves room for mutual discovery. Love bombing, on the other hand, moves so fast that you barely have time to breathe, let alone reflect. While you might think you've found the rarest treasure, what's really happening is the construction of a psychological snare. By pouring on the compliments, by making you believe you've stumbled into a once-in-a-lifetime bond, the manipulator seizes emotional leverage. In the infamous stories of cult indoctrination, new members are often rushed into an environment of radiant unity. They're told they're special. They're given responsibilities that flatter their ego. That wave of dopamine, triggered by constant praise, hooks them. It's the same in personal relationships. When someone love bombs you, each time they send a heartwarming text, your brain gets a hit of pleasure. You become addicted to the rush. If a single day goes by with no contact, you panic. Did you do something wrong? Your mind races to fix whatever might have disrupted the flow of that addictive sweetness. In many love bombing scenarios, the manipulator talks about your shared destiny, They'll mention living together on a mountaintop, traveling the world, maybe even starting a life that sounds straight out of a romantic fairy tale. Initially, it seems flattering. They're brave enough to imagine a future, right? But genuine closeness requires time, reciprocity, and a willingness to see each other's flaws. Love bombers, however, skip the deeper stages of learning who you really are. They feed your fantasies with grandiose plans that keep you focused on an imaginary tomorrow, rather than the uncertain reality of right now. Here's the most unsettling twist. Love bombing rarely stays perfect for long. Eventually, the constant adoration is replaced by a chill in the air. Maybe they respond to messages with half sentences, or vanish for hours or days, leaving you agitated, rereading past texts to figure out what went wrong. This abrupt silence is a form of psychological manipulation. Psychologists call it the same principle that fuels gambling addictions. One day you hit the jackpot, the next day you lose everything. That cycle of hot and cold intensifies your craving, leaving you more willing to do whatever it takes to get back to the honeymoon phase. Cult leaders employ this by alternating fiery praise with intense guilt trips or criticism. In toxic relationships, it can look like a partner who once worshipped your every breath, but now criticizes your attire, your friends, or your hobbies. Then, just when you're about to give up, they swing back to sugary devotion, urging you to trust them again. The effect is dizzying, creating an emotional roller coaster so chaotic you'll cling to any sign of affection like a life raft. The moment you start depending on their viewpoint for self-esteem, they gain control. If you resist, they can yank back their praise, leaving you anxious and more desperate for it. It's a cycle that builds a quiet sense of dependency, often before you realize it. Love bombing warning signs. If someone acts like you're the center of the universe mere days after meeting, pause. Big sweeping statements about your future, discussed too soon and too often. They subtly criticize your friends or family, portraying themselves as the only person who really cares about you. One day, they can't stop adoring you. The next, they vanish or become cold, leaving you off balance. While love bombing appears gentle, who doesn't want more love? It's actually about power. By ensuring you feel high when they shower you with affection and low when they withdraw it, they keep you chasing the next fix. Cults do the same to new converts, praising loyalty at first, then shaming small missteps to keep you forever adjusting to please them. In relationships, the manipulator might push you to cut off friends who don't get us, or belittle your dreams until you rely on them alone for validation. This is how love becomes a trap. You stay not just because of what they give you, but because of what they withhold. Eventually, many victims sense an internal alarm. They notice that every argument mysteriously ends with them apologizing, or that the once unending compliments have become tools of control. They remember the early flood of affection and wonder, was any of it even real? Perhaps they start confiding in a friend, only to hear, this all happened way too fast. Where's your space to breathe? That moment of doubt can feel terrifying, because it shatters the perfect image. But breaking free means acknowledging you deserve real intimacy, something that doesn't rise and fall on another person's whim. Real love may start softly, build steadily, and give you time to learn each other's boundaries. Love bombing races past red lights, forcing closeness before trust can grow naturally. If you suspect you're stuck in a love bombing dynamic, reclaim your pace. Listen to your gut. If it feels overwhelming or scripted, it probably is. Realize that sincere relationships allow for skepticism and slow growth. Notice how they react when you say, let's slow down. If they push back with guilt, tears, or anger, that's a warning sign. Also, stay in touch with those who knew you before this whirlwind romance. Their insight is precious, especially if they see changes in your behavior or mood that you can't see yourself. Walking away from someone who has showered you with love isn't easy. You might question everything. Were you just imagining the moments that felt magical? You might grieve the potential that was promised, all the future plans they spun into your daydreams. Yet genuine healing often begins by remembering. True affection accepts your flaws, respects your pace, and supports you without playing games of push and pull. You may find it helpful to talk about your experience, either with a mental health professional or a trusted confidant. Regaining your footing might involve recognizing that intense compliments aren't proof of love. In fact, they can be the opposite, strategic illusions designed to pull you into someone else's orbit. On the path forward, You'll learn to spot the difference between healthy admiration and manipulative adoration, so you can protect your emotional well-being. Love bombing, at its core, is a psychological ambush. It paralyzes you with gratitude and blinds you with hope, so you won't see the strings attached. The more you chase that initial high, the more entangled you become in their labyrinth of approval. But once you acknowledge the pattern, that roller coaster of overwhelming praise and sudden neglect, its hold begins to fracture, and in the cracks you rediscover a crucial truth. You deserve love that doesn't force you to beg for the very things you were drowning in only moments before. In the end, real devotion unfolds without a script. It gives you room to breathe, to doubt, to ask questions, to grow together in mutual honesty. Anything that demands you surrender your sense of reality for a brief flash of euphoria is not love. It's manipulation wrapped in compliments, a performance carefully curated to keep you under a spell. Idealization and devaluation. Have you ever felt like you were on a pedestal only to be pushed off without warning? One day you're their hero, the next you're the villain. Let's unpack the twisted dance of idealization and devaluation. It begins with a flood of breathtaking admiration. They see you as flawless, extraordinary, someone whose every trait is worthy of awe. You hear things like, "I've never met anyone as brilliant as you," or "You're my inspiration." Their voice trembles with a kind of reverence, as if you're too good for this ordinary world. At first it feels wonderful. You find yourself waking up excited, replaying their compliments in your mind, savoring this dreamlike bond. The sensation is similar to stepping into warm sunlight after a long, cold night, validating, healing, and uplifting. But unbeknownst to you, this over-the-top reverence is part of a psychological tug-of-war known as idealization and devaluation. The manipulator lifts you onto a pedestal so high that you start believing in your own untouchable perfection, at least in their eyes. Then, without warning, they knock you down. Suddenly, every tiny flaw becomes a point of attack, every disagreement proof you're a failure. Where you once heard "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," you now hear "I never knew you were this needy," or "You've let me down again." The glorious beginning, during the idealization phase, you might feel as though you've won a jackpot. No one else has ever praised your talents or personality in such explicit, unfiltered ways. They don't just say you're good at what you do, they call you a genius. They don't just say you're fun to be around, they insist you're the most captivating person on earth. This pedestal feels almost sacred. You worry that if you question it, you'll tarnish something precious. In many manipulative relationships, this stage is reminiscent of cult recruitment strategies. Leaders spot a potential follower and lavish them with public approval. "You have unique energy, your presence is a blessing to us," all while quietly observing which compliments spark the biggest reaction. That information becomes ammunition for later, used to control how the target sees themselves. Transition to the downfall. At first the switch can be so subtle you barely notice it. You offer a small opinion that goes against their narrative, expecting a calm conversation. Instead you get a sharp remark or a disapproving look. Maybe they say, "I thought you were smarter than that," or "Wow, you're not who I believed you were." It stings. You scramble to reconcile the person who just belittled you with the person who, a week ago, was telling you that you shone brighter than the sun. Once this pattern of criticism begins, it rarely remains mild. The manipulator amplifies every perceived shortcoming. They might dig up your past mistakes, things you told them in confidence, and throw those in your face. "You're obviously irresponsible. Remember what happened last year." That's the hallmark of devaluation. You go from angelic to repulsive in their eyes, with no clear transition or reasonable explanation. A dangerous cycle. This dance of extremes, idealization followed by devaluation, creates a profoundly destabilizing environment. You cling to memories of the glory days, convinced that if you just fix yourself, they'll see your goodness again. You try harder, apologize more, or mold your habits to match their preferences. You assume the blame, reasoning that their disappointment in you must come from some real failing on your part. Meanwhile, they stand back, letting you believe you need to earn your way back to that once radiant pedestal. In psychological terms, this cycle serves to break down your self-esteem. During the idealization phase, you form an emotional dependence on their approval. Once that approval is stripped away, you work overtime to regain it. It's a loop that can persist for months, even years, because each brief return to idealization feels like a victory. You tell yourself, this proves they really do value me, but the devaluation always comes back, sometimes with even harsher words. Real life echoes stories of this pattern, echo in various toxic settings. Cult members often describe a honeymoon phase, where they could do no wrong. Every insight they shared was applauded, every personal trait celebrated. Then, out of the blue, the leader condemned them for trivial missteps, calling them traitors or weaklings. In romantic relationships, the partner who once raved about your kindness might suddenly label you selfish for needing a night to yourself. The abrupt shift is jarring, but you cling to the hope that their initial view of you was the real one. Exposing the manipulation idealization is never about genuine understanding. It's about creating an emotional high that fosters dependence. When they say you're perfect, your guard drops. You interpret the compliment as sincere and unstoppable, but the manipulator views this not as adoration, but as a transaction. If I make them feel adored, they'll cling to me, so I can maintain power. Then comes the other side of the coin, the devaluation. Once they've established that you crave their praise, they sabotage your confidence. By insulting you or pointing out your flaws, they make you anxious to recover their approval. So you bend, you compromise, you chase the rush of hearing them say again that you're incredible. In other words, your sense of self becomes tied to their shifting perspective. Psychological consequences. Living in this emotional seesaw can harm your self-worth in ways you might not immediately recognize. You might become hypervigilant, analyzing every micro-expression and tone of voice to detect whether you're about to be devalued again. You might lose the ability to trust your own judgment. Maybe they're right, maybe I'm not as capable as I thought. Over time, you internalize their negative assessments of you, and the once glorious compliments begin to feel like illusions you didn't deserve. This cycle also fractures your relationships with others. Friends or family might warn you that you look drained or anxious, but the manipulator convinces you they're just jealous or ignorant. If you try to confide that you feel unappreciated, the manipulator flips the script, reminding you of all the ways they've supported you, usually referencing that honeymoon phase of sky-high admiration. Red flags: excessive flattery that shifts to harsh criticism. If they treat you like royalty one week and a burden the next, your alarm should sound. Binary language. Phrases like "you're the best ever" or "you're the worst I've encountered" show a black and white mindset. Isolation and blame. They isolate you from external opinions and blame you for the turmoil they orchestrate. Emotional roller coaster. The manipulator controls the altitude, elevating you, then letting you plummet, all to maintain control. Breaking free. Escaping this cycle requires recognizing that no one is all perfect or all terrible. Real connections allow for complexity, imperfection, and respectful disagreement. If someone can't handle your flaws, or conversely, if they project a level of perfection onto you that feels unnatural, they're not seeing you. They're either using you as a canvas for their fantasies or scapegoating you for their frustrations. When you sense the pivot from idealization to devaluation, step back and examine your own feelings. Are you constantly worried about saying the wrong thing? Do you find yourself walking on eggshells just to avoid another outburst of contempt? Talk to trusted friends or a counselor who can provide outside perspective. Their observations can anchor you, reminding you that this erratic treatment is not normal. Healing from the whiplash. Once you leave a manipulator who employs this tactic, you might wrestle with mixed memories. The early adoration felt so real. It's easy to blame yourself for ruining what seemed so good. But it's vital to remember that idealization was never sustainable. It was the bait. The subsequent devaluation was the trap. Processing that can take time. You might grieve the hopeful illusions that were dangled in front of you. Give yourself permission to feel anger, sorrow, or confusion. Each of these emotions can be a step toward reclaiming your sense of self. Over time, your internal compass resets, and you learn the signs of stable affection, a partner who respects you without placing you on an unrealistic pedestal, who can address disagreements without painting you as worthless. Conclusion: idealization and devaluation revolve around extremes, heights that feel like heaven and lows that can cut you to the core. Manipulators exploit these extremes to keep you hooked. ensuring you never stop striving to recapture that lost paradise of limitless praise. But true acceptance doesn't rely on perfection. Real love, whether romantic or communal, doesn't need you to be a flawless idol one moment and an irredeemable failure the next. It holds space for growth, mistakes, and genuine understanding. If you find yourself stuck in a cycle of constant exaltation followed by harsh rejection, recognize the pattern for what it is. You are more than an object to be placed on a shelf or tossed aside. No one deserves to be reduced to a glowing fantasy one day and then shattered the next. Clarity might take time, but once you break free from the illusions, you'll discover the power to stand on your own, neither idolized nor demolished, but grounded in the truth of who you really are. Gaslighting making you doubt yourself. It begins as a strange twinge in your stomach. Nothing alarming, just a faint unease you can't explain. You're talking with someone close, a partner, a friend, a person who claims to care deeply about you, and suddenly they say, "I never told you that. You must be imagining things." A tiny alarm goes off inside you. You recall their exact words, the context, the tone, yet they're so adamant in their denial, so bewildered by your insistence, that you second-guess your own memory. You brush it off, thinking maybe they genuinely forgot, or maybe you're overthinking, but then it happens again. This time, it's not just denial, it's outright rewriting of what you said or did. They recount an incident in a warped way that feels both familiar and horribly incorrect. You try to set the record straight, but they stare at you as if you're speaking nonsense. "You're being dramatic," they say. "Don't you remember how upset you were? Everyone else agrees you were out of control." You freeze, searching your mind for clarity. Were you truly out of control, or is that an exaggeration crafted to make you doubt yourself? This is the subtle, surreal world of a manipulation tactic that hijacks your perceptions, turning confidence into confusion. The term traces back to a 1940s film, where a husband methodically dims the home's gas lamps and insists his wife is hallucinating when she notices. Step by step, she loses trust in her own senses, relying on him to define reality. In modern settings, the details shift. Maybe it's about conversations, text messages, or shared memories, but the essence remains the same: make the other person question what they see, hear, and know. Gaslighting rarely assaults your psyche in a single dramatic blow. Instead, it seeps in drop by drop. You might notice an odd mismatch between how you recall a situation and how they describe it, but they're so confident in their version that you concede. Over time, these small surrenders accumulate. You start thinking, once that uncertainty takes hold, it's like a silent sabotage of your sense of self. A part of you wants to trust your own instincts, but you fear being labeled paranoid or emotional. It's easier to agree with their version, hoping to keep the peace. Yet each agreement chips away at your autonomy. They recast your memories, little by little, until the lines between fact and fiction blur. A hallmark of gaslighting is the internal conflict it triggers. Before this person came along, you likely trusted your memory. Now you find yourself replaying past events with mounting confusion. Did you really insult them that day, or is that a distortion? You pore over conversations, trying to pin down what was said, and if you confront them, they sigh with exasperation. Why can't you just let it go? They might say, turning your need for clarity into yet another flaw. You may also catch them dropping casual remarks like, "Everyone else thinks you're overreacting," even though you haven't heard such complaints from anyone else. This is an isolating tactic by implying the crowd is on their side. They push you to question your own perceptions and doubt whether any allies remain in your corner. Gaslighting often pairs with moments of kindness, or even tenderness. One day they belittle your recollections, the next they treat you to a nice dinner or offer a comforting hug. This emotional whiplash makes you more susceptible. You crave the warmth and acceptance so much that you try to avoid whatever mistakes you allegedly made before. You unconsciously learn to filter your reality through their approval. If they say you're calm today, then everything's good. If they claim you're hysterical, you wonder how you lost control so easily. Meanwhile, they tighten the grip on your sense of truth. Over time, you may even start apologizing for things you didn't do, purely to satisfy their version of events. A tearful response to an insult is recast as oversensitivity. Feeling uneasy about a blatant lie is labeled as paranoia. You retreat further into yourself, longing for the days when you simply trusted what you saw and felt without second-guessing. What distinguishes gaslighting from mere disagreement? The manipulator's unyielding insistence that your reality is invalid. They don't just say, "I see it differently." They claim you're fundamentally mistaken, often implying you're irrational or unstable. They deflect proof, texts, emails, or third-party accounts, saying things like, "That's not what really happened," or "You twisted those words." Over time, evidence loses meaning because they undermine it at every turn, leaving you isolated in your doubts. Liberation from gaslighting begins with recognizing the pattern. Write down events soon after they happen, who said what, where it took place. Having a tangible record to revisit can anchor you when the manipulator tries to revise history. Confide in trusted friends. "Am I recalling this wrong?" Ask for their honest take. Their outside perspective can serve as a compass, orienting you back to a steadier sense of reality. Also, observe how your body reacts. Pay attention to that gut clench of discomfort each time the manipulator claims you're imagining things. Physical cues, like a racing heartbeat or a knot in your chest, can be early warnings that your perception is being attacked. Gaslighting thrives on subtlety. Your intuition might alert you before your conscious mind catches on. Overcoming gaslighting may involve re-establishing the boundaries you once took for granted. Tell yourself, "It might sound simple, but when you've been taught to question every detail, it takes courage to say, 'No, I remember this clearly, and I stand by it.'" If they won't respect that stance, if they push harder, doubling down on how confused you are, this behavior is a major red flag. While not everyone who denies your version of events is a malicious manipulator, consistent, calculated denial of facts to subdue your confidence is classic gaslighting. Imagine stepping out of a dense fog after days spent stumbling around in half-light. That's what it can feel like once you distance yourself from a gaslighter's influence. At first, the brightness can be jarring. You might still hear their voice in your head, telling you you're wrong, or that no one will believe you. But each time you reaffirm what you know to be true, each time you surround yourself with people who validate your experiences rather than deny them, the fog recedes a little more. You start to understand that your recollections, feelings, and thoughts belong to you. They may be imperfect. Everyone's are. But they're not automatically invalid. Life takes on a more stable texture because you're not constantly bracing for the next round of contradictions. Healing from gaslighting is not instant. You might occasionally catch yourself wondering, but each small victory, trusting your recollection of a conversation, asserting that you're not imagining things, standing firm in your emotions, rebuilds your internal compass. Over time, you learn to spot the early signs of gaslighting, so you never lose yourself in that suffocating haze again. No one deserves to have their reality stolen, twisted into a shape that benefits someone else's agenda. Gaslighting is a calculated assault on your mind, yet it often masquerades as concern. "I'm just trying to help you see the truth," they say. But real help doesn't erase your perception, it clarifies it. Real support doesn't make you smaller, it empowers you to stand on solid ground. In the end, your mind is your sanctuary. If someone invades it to plant doubt in every corner, they are not a caring friend, partner, or ally. Recognizing that fact may be painful, but it is also the moment you start reclaiming the key to your own thoughts, and the freedom to trust what you see, feel, and know in your bones. Let them call it overreacting. Let them say you're imagining things. None of it changes the essence of your truth, which is yours to hold, to honor, and to live by, no matter how hard they try to rewrite the script. Future faking. The promise of a tomorrow that never arrives. They promised you forever. A dream house, a fairy tale life, a future worth waiting for. But what if that future was never meant to come? This is the heartbreaking truth about future faking. It often starts with a simple, casual line. "I can't wait until we have our own place," they say, a warm smile lighting up their face. You look at them, heart skipping, wondering if it's too soon to believe, but you want to. You want to picture that shared apartment, filled with mismatched pillows, late-night laughter, and a couple of stray coffee mugs perched on the windowsill. It feels comforting and thrilling at once. Yet somewhere in the back of your mind, There's a small voice saying, "Isn't this a bit fast?" But the voice is easy to hush, because the vision they paint is so mesmerizing. That's how future faking takes hold. In essence, it's a tactic built on big, glittery promises of a fantastic life just around the corner, promises that fuel hope, devotion, and sometimes reckless decisions. It could be the dream wedding they describe in perfect detail, the business you'll supposedly start together, or the cozy cottage they insist you'll both retire to one day. At first, these scenarios seem like harmless daydreams, perhaps even a natural part of a blossoming bond. Healthy relationships, after all, do include glimpses of a shared future. But future faking is different. The manipulator uses it strategically to draw you closer, to make you invest emotionally, and often financially, in something that never quite materializes. It operates like a carrot dangling just out of reach. Each time you lean in, each time you commit a little more, they recast the promise in fresh colors, so you won't notice how distant it still is. Over weeks, months, or sometimes years, your life can revolve around illusions of someday soon. Imagine a partner who sweeps you into conversations about moving to a charming coastal town, rhapsodizing about the sea air and the gentle waves. They talk about picking out curtains together, planning weekend picnics on the beach, maybe even adopting a pair of dogs to complete the picture. You start researching neighborhoods, budgeting for the move, maybe even updating your resume for remote or local job opportunities. You're all in heart and soul, yet whenever you ask for specifics, the story becomes vague. "We'll do it next year, after I sort out my finances," or "I'm just waiting on that promotion at work." Each conversation shifts the horizon line, so you remain in a perpetual state of anticipation. Over time, these unrealized plans can take a toll on your sense of stability. You find yourself making accommodations, postponing personal projects, turning down job offers in your own city, or distancing yourself from supportive friends, because you believe a major change is on the horizon. The manipulator, for their part, continues to craft narratives about the future. "Once we settle in that beach house, everything will be perfect," or "Hold on a little longer, and you'll see how happy we'll be." The problem is that a little longer keeps stretching, and perfect never comes. Whenever you press for a timeline or ask concrete questions, "How exactly are we paying for this dream place? When do we start looking at houses?" they find reasons to evade or deflect. "Stop pressuring me," they might complain, flipping the script so you feel guilty for wanting clarity. Or they may deliver dramatic excuses, a sudden crisis at work, an ailing relative, an unexpected bill. These events might be real or exaggerated. Either way, they conveniently postpone the big move yet again. People often compare future faking to a gambler's addiction. You've already poured so much time, energy, and hope into the plan that walking away feels like a loss. So you keep feeding the slot machine, convinced the jackpot is just around the corner. When they notice you wavering, the manipulator might intensify the sweet talk. They'll promise something even grander: a second home in the mountains, a dream honeymoon in Bali, or a lavish party to celebrate once your perfect future finally begins. They spin more threads for you to cling to, weaving them into a tapestry so bright you can't see the growing holes. Occasionally you might see small progress steps that give you hope. Perhaps they mention viewing a rental online, or they drive you past an up-and-coming neighborhood. They might even propose a meeting with a realtor, only to cancel last minute or claim the timing isn't right. In isolation, these gestures look like genuine attempts. In reality, they can be breadcrumbs to keep you hooked. Each minor move is overshadowed by endless delays. The emotional cost all the while, you're paying a steep price. Future faking can eat away at self-confidence and mental well-being. You wonder, am I too impatient? Am I the problem? If they insist they want the same future, why aren't we making progress? Guilt and confusion eat at you. You might stop talking to friends about your relationship because repeating the same half-formed plan sounds embarrassing. Instead, you bury your doubts, convinced that love just needs faith and patience. In the background, though, your daily life stagnates. You might forgo career opportunities or reject social invitations because you believe your life trajectory is about to shift dramatically. You place major personal decisions on hold. Meanwhile, the manipulator reaps the benefit of your dedication, your free labor, your emotional support, or your financial contributions, without having to deliver on any of the grand visions they sold you. Why they do it? Future faking can serve multiple manipulative goals. Sometimes it's about fostering deep attachment. By describing an idyllic tomorrow, they lock you into a state of expectancy and loyalty. Other times, it's a way to avoid accountability in the present. They claim things will be better soon, as an excuse for not fixing issues right now. In other cases, it's simply a method of control, keeping you tethered to them so you won't leave. Red flags to watch out for: extremely grand plans proposed too soon. They talk marriage or life-altering moves early on, pressuring you to share the excitement. No clear steps or timelines. Any attempt to nail down specifics leads to vague promises or guilt trips. Constant postponements. You hear about new obstacles whenever you ask for progress, yet no workable solutions ever surface. Emotional volatility. When you press for details, they accuse you of being pushy or negative, turning the tables so you feel bad for wanting clarity. Parallel with other manipulation tactics, future faking often pairs seamlessly with love bombing or gaslighting. They might have initially bombarded you with affection, then used visions of an amazing future together to justify the whirlwind pace. If you start questioning these visions, they could pivot to gaslighting, insisting you always knew they needed more time, or that you misunderstood their intentions. In doing so, they corrode your sense of what was actually said, leaving you clinging to illusions you once believed wholeheartedly. Breaking free from the illusion, stepping off the roller coaster, requires a moment of grounding. It might start with an uneasy feeling that months or even years have passed with no tangible progress toward the big plans. A part of you could realize that every conversation about the future feels cyclical, like a well-rehearsed script. Recognizing this is crucial. The pattern is not leading anywhere real, it's circling you back to the same illusions. If you suspect future faking, ask for concrete steps. Propose a deadline or a logical sequence of actions. If you want to move next summer, ask them to schedule an apartment viewing, or at least research mortgage options. If they bristle at these requests or deflect them with yet another grand promise, you have evidence that the visions aren't genuine. While healthy individuals might hesitate or worry, they're typically willing to discuss specifics or compromise. It can help to share your concerns with a trusted friend or counselor. External perspectives cut through self-blame. They remind you that wanting to see real progress is normal, not pushy. A neutral observer can highlight inconsistencies and confirm your intuition that talk without action is a red flag, not a mere quirk of personality. Emotional recovery and rebuilding. Walking away from someone who promised you the world is painful, even if you now see it was mostly empty words. You might grieve the idea of what could have been. You might feel duped, angry, or deeply disappointed. That's natural. Healing begins with acknowledging that your hope was real, even if their intentions weren't. You placed your trust in a dream you both sketched, only to discover you were the sole architect putting effort into it. Over time, you learn to value the present. You focus on immediate realities, friendships, personal goals, passions, rather than grand, indefinite promises. Rebuilding might mean reorienting your priorities, picking up the threads of plans you set aside while waiting on that dazzling future. It might also involve re-examining your boundaries and red flag radar, so you don't fall for similar illusions again. Conclusion: future faking thrives on desire, your desire for a stable, joyful tomorrow. It taps into your natural optimism, fueling a belief that with enough patience and love, the shining castle they describe will become real. But illusions can only sustain themselves for so long without concrete action. In a healthy relationship, talk of the future emerges from mutual effort, honest discussion, and a willingness to tackle practical challenges. When those elements are missing, you're left with sweet words that never translate into reality. Above all, remember that genuine partners walk the path beside you. They share details, handle setbacks, and approach each stumbling block as a team. They don't keep moving the finish line, nor do they evade your concerns when you seek clarity. If you find yourself haunted by empty promises and indefinite delays, it's worth stepping back to ask, is this future a shared journey, or a story told to keep me waiting? Answering that question honestly is a key part of reclaiming your power and sense of direction. Because no matter how enticing the dream may be, you deserve more than a mirage that never moves beyond words. You deserve a relationship where tomorrow is built together, step by tangible step, rather than painted in glowing colors just out of reach. And once you understand that, you'll find the strength to free yourself from the never-ending postponements and invest in a life that's rooted in the here and now, where promises align with actions and shared hopes blossom into something real. Intermittent reinforcement. It feels like magic, until it doesn't. The highs are unforgettable, the lows unbearable. Welcome to the psychological trap of intermittent reinforcement, where love becomes a guessing game. It starts with a moment of pure delight, maybe a tender gesture, a sweet message, or unexpected praise that sends your heart soaring. You feel acknowledged and valued, as though all the doubts clouding your connection have disappeared. Then, just as you begin to savor that closeness, it evaporates. Calls go unanswered, texts remain unseen, and you're left wondering what you did wrong. Days later, the affection returns, flooding you with relief. This cyclical dance, swinging between intense warmth and cold distance, is the essence of one of the most powerful tools in a manipulator's arsenal. The mechanism is simple but incredibly effective. In behavioral psychology, subjects respond more persistently to rewards delivered on an unpredictable schedule than those offered consistently. Think of a slot machine. You never know when you'll win, so you keep pulling the lever in hopes the next spin brings a payout. In relationships, it plays out with emotional stakes. You don't realize you're being conditioned to chase those fleeting moments of closeness, ignoring the pain of the prolonged silences in between. At first, the thrill can feel almost magical. One day, your partner surprises you with lavish praise or affectionate words that make you feel uniquely cherished. Your doubts vanish. You believe this is the turning point where your bond finally solidifies. But soon their attention dissipates, and you're once again left reaching for any sign they still care. It might be a brief text or a quick smile, but to you it's confirmation that the spark isn't gone. You hold on to that morsel of validation, trusting it means the affection will flow again soon. This pattern forms a confusing vortex of longing and relief. Each new cycle of kindness wipes away previous disappointment, keeping you invested. You focus on the highs, determined to bring them back, so the lows become tolerable, even if they grow longer or more disheartening. By the time friends suggest you leave, you can't imagine life without those occasional bursts of attention. Instead, you cling tighter, hoping your patience will make the good stretches permanent. Manipulators often combine intermittent reinforcement with other tactics, like or to deepen dependency. They might soothe your worries with vague promises of a better tomorrow, then back away once you're reassured. When you raise concerns, they insist you're overreacting or being needy. This reversal salves self-doubt. You apologize, scramble to be less demanding, and wait for the next wave of tenderness. Their unpredictability ensures you remain off balance, focusing more on regaining approval than questioning the fairness of the dynamic. The emotional roller coaster has a potent physiological effect. Stress hormones surge during the cold spells, causing anxiety and an urge to fix whatever is broken. When the warmth returns, you bask in euphoria, flooded with relief-induced endorphins. Over time, your mind associates that manipulative figure with a rare sense of safety, even though they're the same person causing your distress. Cults exploit a similar cycle to bind members to the group. Leaders might celebrate a follower publicly for seemingly trivial contributions, then suddenly criticize them for not meeting hidden standards. Driven by the memory of that initial praise, members push harder, hoping to be recognized again. Toxic workplaces can operate in the same way. A boss offers random compliments, maybe a bonus here, a project lead there, followed by unreasonable demands. Employees stay, convinced they can win more praise if they just try hard enough. Meanwhile, consistent negativity would have driven them away much sooner. Breaking free starts with recognizing you're being conditioned. Take a step back and list out the times you truly felt valued versus the periods you were left guessing. If those positive moments are both infrequent and unpredictable, that's a red flag. Challenge the narrative that everything will get better if you're just patient enough. Healthy bonds don't require you to endure emotional extremes. They revolve around consistency and open communication. If a partner or authority figure objects to discussing concerns or calls you clingy for wanting stability, that's another warning sign. It might help to speak to friends outside the situation. Their vantage point can clarify patterns you can't see within the daily push and pull. Professional counseling is also an option, especially if the repeated highs and lows have affected your mental health. Recognizing your own response to intermittent reinforcement is crucial. Do you feel compelled to prove your worth whenever they withdraw affection? Have you abandoned personal goals, friendships, or self-care just to earn their next kind word? As you distance yourself, expect fear to creep in. A big part of intermittent reinforcement's power is the memory of those sweet moments. You'll question whether you're throwing away something that could be beautiful, but remember, genuine love or respect doesn't leave you in constant suspense, wondering whether tomorrow brings praise or punishment. Consistency, honesty, and mutual respect are hallmarks of healthy relationships, values that don't vanish without explanation. In time, you can unlearn the reflex to chase after minimal rewards. You'll remember what it feels like to experience steady, supportive bonds in which you're not kept in a perpetual state of craving. You'll discover the difference between exhilarating illusions and the real security that comes from knowing where you stand. The manipulator's unpredictable acts will then seem far less enticing once you see them for what they truly are: a careful drip of attention meant to keep you tethered, rather than a genuine flow of care. Ultimately, no matter how dazzling those rare good days appear, they can't compensate for the anxiety of all the bad ones. Relies on hope, but a hope fed by uncertainty and emotional turbulence can consume you. By recognizing the cycle and asserting your right to predictable kindness, you reclaim the inner stability that no wave of unpredictable affection can ever truly replace. Silent treatment. When silence becomes a weapon, there were no screams, no insults, just silence so loud, it echoed in your mind. This is the silent treatment, a weapon disguised as peace. You sense the shift before you pinpoint its cause. A sudden lack of eye contact, texts ignored for hours, a palpable tension that weighs on every room you enter. There's no shouting, no dramatic argument, just a wall of icy silence. Questions hang in the air unanswered, and your own voice starts to feel intrusive, like you're disturbing some unspoken decree. This is the silent treatment, a form of psychological warfare that hinges not on what is said, but on the refusal to speak at all. At first you might try to downplay it. Perhaps they're just having a bad day, or they need space to reflect. But as hours turn to days, you realize this is a calculated act. Silence transforms from a personal mood into a pointed message. You are not worth engaging. It stings in a unique way. Anger or criticism at least acknowledges your presence, but silence erases you. It's a subtle form of exile, wielded to make you question your actions, your words, even your own worth. Why it hurts so deeply? Humans are wired to seek connection. When someone close to us withdraws communication, our basic need for affirmation jolts into panic mode. We wonder if we've crossed an unforgivable line, or if they've stopped caring altogether. That anxiety can spiral quickly. A short spell of muteness from a partner or friend can feel more devastating than a heated argument, because it lacks any clear path to resolution. You can't negotiate with a silence that refuses to name its grievance. Weaponized withdrawal in manipulative hands. The silent treatment isn't just a passive shutdown, it's a deliberate mechanism to assert control and punish. The giver knows you're left twisting in the wind, desperate to fix whatever might be broken. You second-guess yourself, combing through each recent conversation or event, searching for a spark that might have ignited this cold front. Meanwhile, the person withholding speech remains in a position of power, forcing you to chase their attention without ever having to voice a complaint or make a direct demand. Sometimes, the manipulator may sprinkle hints, a curt nod in response to your questions, or the occasional sigh if you plead for clarity. These crumbs fuel your resolve to make amends, even when you're not entirely sure what you did wrong. It becomes a scenario in which you're apologizing for your very presence, hoping to regain the minimal courtesy of a simple reply. Over time, that dynamic can embed a deep sense of insecurity and guilt. You become hyper-aware of every small action, fearful that even the slightest misstep will trigger another silent lockdown. A gradual erosion. Cults, toxic bosses, and controlling family members can all use silence as a method to isolate and dominate. Within a family, a parent might refuse to acknowledge a child for days, leaving them feeling unloved and responsible for the household tension. In workplaces, a manager might strategically ignore an employee's input or queries, effectively sidelining them without ever uttering a reprimand. The psychological impact accumulates. Silence becomes a form of social punishment. You are ostracized without clarity, and any attempt to mend the situation rests solely on your shoulders. The recipient of the silent treatment often takes on a disproportionate sense of blame. It's as though they're stuck in a one-person argument, trying to guess the other party's grievances, forging solutions in the dark, and constantly tiptoeing to avoid another freeze-out. This leads to an exhausting cycle, where appeasing the silent individual becomes the priority over one's own emotional well-being. Signs and consequences: sudden, prolonged quiet. It isn't about a moment of reflection, rather it lingers conspicuously, leaving no room for resolution. Power imbalance. You feel compelled to appease or soothe them despite no explicit request for change. Self-doubt spirals. You question your memory, replaying interactions, convinced you must have done something terrible to deserve this void. Emotional exhaustion. Over time, a repeated cycle of silent withdrawals can leave you drained, anxious, and constantly on guard. Breaking the spell. Confronting a weaponized silence can be tricky. Directly demanding they speak often leads to pushback, as they might say you're pressuring them or playing victim. Still, setting boundaries is crucial. Calmly express that you're open to hearing any concerns, but you won't shoulder all guilt in a vacuum of unspoken accusations. Propose a time to talk. If they choose not to show up, note the refusal and maintain your own emotional equilibrium. Silence can't effectively hold you hostage if you name it for what it is: a tactic to control the conversation by refusing to have one. Talking to someone outside the situation helps restore perspective. A friend, family member, or therapist can validate your feelings, remind you that you're not inherently at fault, and encourage you to resist the urge to appease endlessly. Sometimes, stepping away from the dynamic entirely is necessary, especially if each reconciliation only leads to another punishing stretch of non-communication. Navigating the emotional fallout. Once you recognize how toxic repeated silent treatments can be, you might experience a surge of anger or betrayal. All that worry for nothing, you think, or I gave up my peace just to earn back a few words from them. This emotional turbulence is part of realizing you were toyed with, to some extent, by someone's deliberate withdrawal of connection. Allow yourself to feel that frustration. Bottling it up only prolongs the sense of victimhood. Acknowledging the manipulation often marks the first step toward reclaiming your emotional center. If you continue in the same circle, always chasing their rare moments of warmth, you risk normalizing this behavior. Over time, your standards may warp, letting you accept silent ostracism as a routine sign of conflict rather than an unhealthy power play. Remember that real, constructive disagreements involve discussion, not punishing silence. A path to genuine dialogue. Healthy relationships, even rocky ones, involve two-way communication. Silence, if used at all, is a temporary pause to calm down or gather thoughts, never a prolonged strategy to dominate or degrade. You deserve interactions that allow for resolution, apology, or growth. If your attempts at genuine dialogue consistently hit a wall of silence, and you find yourself begging for scraps of acknowledgement, it's time to reassess how viable or fair that bond truly is. Yes, people sometimes need solitude to process strong emotions. The difference lies in intent. Is the quiet a genuine need for reflection, or is it a tool to manipulate? Clues often emerge in how they end the silence. Do they rejoin the conversation with empathy, or do they act as though you're the one who caused the entire rift by questioning their behavior? Their approach can reveal whether they're seeking harmony or merely enjoying control. Conclusion. The silent treatment is insidious, precisely because it looks like nothing. There are no dramatic words to remember, no visible scars, yet the psychological imprint can be deep. When someone routinely leverages silence to unnerve, punish, or dominate, they're sending a message louder than any shout. Your voice doesn't matter unless I decide it does. Recognizing this dynamic is key. Then, by naming it, addressing it, and if need be, removing yourself from its grip, you reclaim the power to speak your truth freely. Silence can be golden in many contexts, but when weaponized, it tarnishes faster than any spoken insult ever could. Fear of abandonment. You overthink every pause, panic over every unread message, and prepare for the goodbye that hasn't even come yet. That's not love. It's the fear of being left behind. In the stillness of an uncertain night, a cold whisper lingers in your mind, an echo of a fear that you cannot shake. It is not the fear of a distant threat, but an ever-present anxiety that someone you hold dear might simply vanish, leaving you stranded in a world of solitude. This is the heart of the fear of abandonment, a force that binds and confines, not with physical chains, but with invisible ties woven from dread and longing. You recall moments when a gentle touch or a soft word was enough to quiet this fear, when promises of steadfast presence made the world seem secure. But over time, that assurance begins to crumble. Perhaps it started with a late reply to a message, or a missed phone call on a rainy day. Small omissions, once insignificant, slowly become jagged reminders that the people you trust might one day choose to leave. As the light of certainty dims, your mind begins to construct shadows where there were none, imagining every silence as a prelude to desertion. Unlike the overt gestures of manipulation you might recognize in other forms, the terror of abandonment is subtle. It insinuates itself in the spaces between words, in the gaps where laughter once filled the room. You may not notice it at first, only an occasional ache in your chest, but soon it grows into a persistent gnawing unease. You start wondering if every moment of quiet is a silent farewell, if every distant glance hides a silent withdrawal of affection. This fear has a way of seeping into your actions, dictating how you interact with those you love. You find yourself clinging a little too tightly, fearing that any slight move away might prompt a final departure. Your thoughts are consumed by the possibility of being left behind, and every farewell, every parting glance is scrutinized as if it holds the secret to your future loneliness. There's a constant underlying hum of anxiety, as if your heart is tethered to a fragile promise of togetherness that could snap at any moment. In relationships, this fear can manifest in various forms. Sometimes it drives you to seek constant reassurance, a never-ending stream of "I love you" texts or calls to confirm that you are still valued. At other times, it makes you hyper-aware of any perceived hint of disinterest, magnifying minor lapses into catastrophic signs of impending abandonment. You might catch yourself overanalyzing a partner's brief distraction, a fleeting frown, or an offhand remark. Each instance becomes a puzzle piece that, when assembled in your mind, forms a picture of inevitable loss. The paradox is that this fear, born from a desire for intimacy and stability, can paradoxically sow the seeds of isolation. In a desperate bid to avoid being left, you might inadvertently push others away, demanding constant validation, smothering them with neediness, or even testing their loyalty with behaviors that border on insecurity. This self-perpetuating cycle of fear and reaction creates a barrier, making genuine connection more difficult. Those you love may begin to withdraw, not out of a lack of care, but out of a sense of suffocation. The more you attempt to secure their presence, the more fragile the bond becomes. Imagine a delicate garden, where each flower represents a relationship nurtured over time. The fear of abandonment is like a relentless storm that not only drenches the garden, but uproots the plants one by one. You watch helplessly as what was once vibrant and full of life begins to wilt, replaced by a barren expanse of mistrust. The storm doesn't destroy everything at once. It works slowly, corroding the foundation of trust, until what remains is a landscape of fear. This psychological trap is often intensified by past wounds. Memories of previous losses, whether through breakups, betrayals, or even childhood separations, can leave indelible scars on your heart. Those memories resurface when you sense even a hint of neglect, transforming them into a present terror that feels as raw as the initial pain. Every miscommunication, every delay, becomes a confirmation of that old wound reopening, reinforcing the belief that you are destined to be abandoned. There is a peculiar irony in this fear. In your quest for security, you might end up reinforcing the very pattern you dread. By living in a state of constant alert, your emotional responses become heightened. Each new interaction is colored by past betrayals, and trust becomes a luxury you can ill afford. Friends or partners may try to offer gentle reassurances, but the echo of past abandonment muffles their words. Even when you are told that everything is all right, A small, persistent voice questions the truth of those assurances. Yet amid this internal chaos, there is a path toward healing. It begins with recognizing the patterns that fuel your fear, the tendency to interpret benign actions as signs of impending loss, and the habit of clinging too tightly in the name of protection. Part of the journey is to learn that love, in its truest form, is an exchange that thrives on freedom as much as on connection. Trust, then, becomes not a passive state, but an active choice, a deliberate act of letting go of the imagined specters of abandonment. One step toward this healing is to cultivate self-reliance. When you build a secure foundation within yourself, the impact of external rejections diminishes. It's about finding value in your own presence, appreciating your strengths, and acknowledging that your worth is not solely defined by the attention or validation you receive from others. Therapy, journaling, or simply spending time in introspection can serve as powerful tools in this process. With each small victory, the grip of fear loosens, allowing space for genuine connection to flourish, without the constant undercurrent of dread. Another important aspect is communication. Expressing your fears openly can be both liberating and enlightening. When you share your vulnerabilities with someone you trust, you allow them to understand your perspective, which can lead to greater empathy and reassurance. Of course, this requires a partner or friend who is willing to listen without judgment, a person who understands that fear of abandonment is not a weakness, but a wound that needs gentle care. Over time, as you become more comfortable with the uncertainties of human connection, you might notice a shift in your emotional landscape. The urgency of clinging may give way to a more balanced approach, where relationships are built on mutual respect rather than fear. The idea that someone will abandon you can still linger, but it no longer dominates your every thought or decision. Instead, you learn to embrace the present, cherishing the moments of intimacy, without letting the shadow of potential loss dictate your actions. In the end, the fear of abandonment is a profound reminder of our innate need for belonging. It is the price we pay for opening ourselves up to others, with all the attendant risks of hurt and loss. But it is also a call to cultivate resilience, to build relationships that are grounded in trust and understanding, rather than in the constant anxiety of separation. When you dare to challenge this fear, you reclaim not only your emotional freedom, but also the possibility of a love that is both deep and secure, a love that does not demand sacrifice of your inner peace. May you find the courage to let go of the ghostly chains of fear, to trust in the beauty of imperfection, and to build bonds that endure not because they are forced, but because they are nurtured by genuine care. For in the quiet spaces where fear once reigned, there lies the potential for a new beginning, one where connection is not a precarious promise, but a comforting reality. Projection. Blaming you for their own fears. You didn't do it, but somehow, you're the one apologizing. That's not accountability. It's projection, when someone else's inner chaos becomes your burden to carry. Imagine standing in a room filled with mirrors that distort your reflection. Every time you look into one, instead of seeing your own face, you see fragments of someone else's anxiety, accusations that you're responsible for emotions you never felt. This is projection, a subtle yet corrosive tactic, where someone transfers their own inner terrors onto you, making you bear the weight of fears that aren't yours. It often begins with small, offhand comments. One day, during a quiet conversation, they might remark, "You always make things worse," or "I can't believe how you overreact to everything." At first, these statements seem like criticisms of your behavior, but over time they reveal a deeper pattern. The accusations are not a reflection of your shortcomings. They are a mirror for their own insecurities. When they feel overwhelmed by fear or doubt, instead of confronting those emotions, they project them onto you. It's as if they whisper, "It's your fault for making me feel this way," shifting responsibility away from their own vulnerability. The unsettling part is that you begin to internalize these messages. You start to wonder if perhaps you are the source of their distress. Slowly, the burden of blame settles on your shoulders, and you find yourself questioning every decision, every word and every gesture. It's a relentless cycle. Each time you try to clarify your intentions or explain your actions, they twist the narrative, insisting that your behavior confirms their worst fears. Their own anxieties remain unspoken, masked behind a barrage of criticism that paints you as the villain. In this dynamic, Your feelings become entangled with their unacknowledged fears. Instead of addressing the root of their anxiety, they turn the spotlight onto you, leaving you to navigate a maze of self-doubt. You might catch yourself apologizing for things you never intended, or altering your behavior to avoid triggering their projected insecurities. Over time, the boundary between their emotions and your identity blurs. You start to believe that if you change, perhaps the darkness that haunts them will dissipate. But in truth, the source of their distress remains hidden, locked away in their own unresolved fears. Projection serves as a convenient escape for the person doing the projecting. It spares them from confronting their own imperfections, their own feelings of inadequacy. Instead of grappling with the messy reality of their inner world, they find it easier to point a finger. It's a silent accusation that you're the one to blame for their pain, even if that pain has no logical origin in your actions. Over time, you might notice that whenever they feel particularly threatened by stress at work, personal failures, or even societal pressures, they tend to lash out. And invariably, the target is you. This tactic can be especially insidious in close relationships. A partner who uses projection might frequently claim that you're insensitive or uncaring, even though you're the one offering support. A friend might accuse you of abandoning them in times of need, while the true source of their isolation is their own inability to seek help or accept care. In each case, the blame is misdirected, a smokescreen that conceals the real issues. The projected fears become a convenient scapegoat, allowing the manipulator to avoid responsibility for their own emotional turmoil. Over time, the effects of projection accumulate. You might find yourself increasingly isolated, not because others have turned away, but because you begin to withdraw into yourself. The relentless barrage of blame chips away at your self-confidence until every constructive attempt at communication is met with the bitter echo of, "It's all your fault." This can leave you feeling trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and regret, where every effort to change is paralleled by an even stronger sense of inadequacy. One of the most challenging aspects of dealing with projection is its deceptive nature. It doesn't come with overt hostility, rather it sneaks in under the guise of concern or gentle chiding. You may initially rationalize the comments, thinking, "Maybe I did overreact, or perhaps I should be more considerate," but when these thoughts multiply, they form a pattern that is not about your behavior at all. It's about their inability to manage their own emotions. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward reclaiming your sense of self. Breaking free from the grip of projection involves establishing clear boundaries. It's essential to remind yourself that the feelings they attribute to you are not inherently your own. One useful strategy is to keep a journal of events and conversations, noting how often you are blamed for issues that, upon reflection, do not logically stem from your actions. This written record can serve as a reality check, a reminder that their criticisms are not objective truths, but rather reflections of their internal struggles. Another vital step is seeking support outside the relationship. Talking to a trusted friend, counselor, or therapist can provide a much-needed external perspective. When you share your experiences with someone who isn't caught up in the cycle of blame, you might begin to see that the pattern is not your fault. These external voices can help you validate your feelings, reminding you that it's not wrong to assert your own emotional truth. They can also guide you in developing strategies to communicate your needs without being overwhelmed by guilt or self-doubt. Ultimately, reclaiming your autonomy means understanding that you are not responsible for someone else's fears. Their projected blame is a reflection of their own inner conflict, a defense mechanism designed to protect them from facing painful truths about themselves. As painful as it may be, acknowledging this fact can liberate you from the cycle of undue guilt. You learn to set limits on how much of their emotional burden you are willing to carry, and you begin to prioritize your own well-being over their misplaced accusations. In time, the constant questioning of your own motives can be replaced with a reaffirmation of your values and worth. Trusting yourself again becomes a deliberate act of defiance, a refusal to let someone else's unresolved fears dictate how you feel about who you are. You might discover that the more you stand firm in your own reality, the less room there is for their projections. In the end, the power of projection diminishes when you refuse to accept blame for emotions that originate elsewhere. Projection at its core is a way of diverting attention from one's own insecurities. By holding you accountable for feelings you never intended to evoke, the manipulator creates a distorted narrative that benefits only their need for self-preservation, but you are not defined by their fears. Your emotions, thoughts, and experiences are yours alone. Recognizing this truth is the key to breaking free, a step toward a future where you can engage in relationships based on mutual respect, free from the heavy, misplaced burden of blame. Playing the victim, the art of avoiding responsibility. Every argument ends the same. You're the villain, they're the wounded hero. But what if it's all just a performance to escape accountability? In a world where every mistake demands an explanation, there exists a peculiar power in portraying oneself as the perpetual sufferer. You encounter someone who, despite clear evidence of their own missteps, always seems to be the one wronged, a person whose sorrow and self-pity become a shield against accountability. This is the art of playing the victim, a tactic where responsibility is deflected by casting oneself as the eternal martyr. At first glance, the behavior may seem sympathetic. Their eyes glisten with a hint of sadness. Their voice carries an undercurrent of hurt that feels all too real. They recount a story of woe, a tale woven with threads of betrayal, sacrifice, and unjust treatment. In these moments you might find yourself reaching out, eager to offer comfort or reassurance. The narrative is compelling, designed to evoke empathy, yet beneath this veneer of suffering lies a calculated strategy. By painting themselves as the injured party, they shift focus away from their own actions and onto your supposed failures. Imagine a scene where, after a minor disagreement, instead of engaging in a genuine discussion, they launch into a monologue about how deeply they've been wounded by your words. "I've given everything for us, and yet you never seem to care," they say, as if the burden of the world rests solely on their shoulders. The story quickly morphs into one where your role becomes that of an unintentional aggressor, a person who, without meaning to, has inflicted unbearable pain. Suddenly, any attempt on your part to seek clarification or voice your perspective is met with a flood of tears and an insistence that your concern only adds to their sorrow. This tactic is both subtle and insidious. It thrives on the natural human inclination to protect the vulnerable. When someone appears to be suffering, our instinct is to comfort them, to listen, and to validate their feelings. But what if that vulnerability is feigned? What if the sadness is a mask, one crafted to deflect criticism and avoid the burden of responsibility? In playing the victim, the manipulator creates an imbalance. Their pain becomes the center of every conversation, while your legitimate concerns fade into the background. You find yourself apologizing for things that aren't yours to bear, constantly questioning whether you've been insensitive or uncaring. The pattern often emerges slowly. In the early days, you might notice minor discrepancies, instances where their account of events seems exaggerated or selectively remembered. Yet in the heat of a conflict, these details dissolve into the overwhelming narrative of their suffering. They recall past grievances with an emotional intensity that renders objective facts irrelevant. "I can't believe you would do that after everything I've endured," becomes a refrain that drowns out any evidence to the contrary. Before long, every disagreement is reframed. Your input is rendered inconsequential because in their story, they are the one who has been endlessly wronged. This constant redirection of blame has profound effects on your sense of self. Over time, you begin to internalize the notion that perhaps you are the source of the discord. You start second-guessing your own memories, your own emotions, and your very identity. The more they insist on your culpability, the more you question whether you deserve the compassion you once offered so freely. It's as if your own voice is gradually silenced by the clamor of their unending lament. The resulting self-doubt becomes a quiet prison, a place where every effort to assert your own perspective is undermined by the weight of their sorrow. Moreover, this method of playing the victim is rarely accidental. It is a deliberate strategy used to avoid accountability and control the narrative. When the manipulator succeeds in painting you as the one who has hurt them, any criticism of their behavior is automatically dismissed as a lack of empathy. They position themselves as the innocent sufferer and you as the callous wrongdoer. In doing so, they not only escape responsibility for their own actions, but also gain a sort of moral high ground. They become the emblem of injustice, and your attempts to defend yourself are seen as further evidence of your alleged cruelty. This dynamic is particularly effective in relationships where trust has been gradually undermined. Friends, family, or colleagues who observe the situation might find it difficult to discern the truth. The manipulator's emotional performance is so convincing that even objective observers can be swayed into taking sides. They remind everyone of past sacrifices, of moments when they supposedly bore the brunt of the hardship. In such an environment, your voice becomes isolated. Each time you try to speak up, you're met with, "How could you be so unfeeling after all I've gone through?" The cycle continues, with the victim narrative solidifying their position and leaving you trapped in a labyrinth of guilt and self-doubt. Yet, beneath the surface, there is a call for liberation, a reminder that genuine relationships thrive on mutual accountability and honest dialogue. The art of playing the victim, while powerful in the short term, eventually unravels under the weight of its own contradictions. Over time, those who are repeatedly subjected to this manipulation may begin to recognize the pattern. They start to see that the endless cycle of sorrow and blame is not a reflection of their own failings, but rather a carefully constructed facade, designed to deflect responsibility. Breaking free from this cycle requires a firm reassertion of your own perspective. It means acknowledging that while empathy is essential, it should never come at the cost of your own voice. Begin by validating your own experiences, recording your recollections, and seeking the counsel of those who can offer an impartial perspective. Confronting the manipulator may not always lead to a resolution. Often they double down on their narrative, but it is a necessary step in reclaiming your autonomy. Setting boundaries becomes paramount. You have the right to express your thoughts and feelings without being forced into the role of the villain in someone else's tragic play. Ultimately, playing the victim is a diversion, a way to obscure responsibility and maintain control over the relationship's emotional climate. It exploits the natural human desire to care for those who are hurting, turning that very care into a weapon against you. Recognizing this manipulation for what it is can be the first step toward breaking the cycle. You deserve a space where your feelings are not used against you, where both parties can acknowledge mistakes and work toward genuine understanding. By reclaiming your own narrative, you affirm that pain should not be a currency for blame, and that true connection is built on mutual respect rather than one-sided martyrdom. In choosing to step away from the perpetual role of the oppressor and the victim, you open the door to healthier dynamics, ones where both joy and sorrow are shared, not exploited. And in that liberation, you rediscover the power of your own voice, unburdened by the weight of undeserved guilt. Creating dependency, making you forget life without me. They didn't chain you. They praised you, helped you, loved you so much, you forgot who you were without them. That's not devotion. That's dependency, by design. In the quiet beginning, dependency is born not from overt control, but from a series of small, almost imperceptible choices. It starts with the way they position themselves as your sole source of comfort, your only haven in an unpredictable world. Each gentle act of kindness, each meticulously planned gesture, whispers to you that without them, the world would be a much colder, emptier place. Picture a tender vine that slowly wraps itself around a tree. At first it simply leans in for support, but gradually it coils ever tighter until the tree can no longer stand independently. In relationships, the manipulator plants subtle seeds of doubt about your self-sufficiency, hinting that the parts of you that once thrived on independence are fragile. They say, "I'm the only one who truly understands you, or without me, you wouldn't get through your day." These words aren't just compliments, they're carefully crafted anchors, designed to keep you tethered. Over time, you begin to internalize the notion that your best self can only exist with them by your side. The relationship transforms into an exclusive ecosystem where every decision, every small joy, is filtered through the lens of their influence. You start relying on their opinions and emotional support to navigate life's uncertainties. When challenges arise, you reach for their guidance, feeling incapable of coping on your own. This gradual shift makes it seem as if the world without them is an uncharted, even hostile territory. The manipulator's strategy is methodical. They isolate you from sources of external validation, slowly distancing you from friends, family, and even hobbies that once defined who you are. In conversations, they might undermine your interests with subtle remarks like, "That group doesn't really get you," or "Your old friends only care about shallow things." The effect is insidious. Bit by bit, you begin to question the value of your own connections, and their voice becomes the only one you trust. Imagine a lighthouse that over time becomes the sole beacon in a vast dark ocean. Initially, you might notice other lights flickering in the distance, symbols of independent friendships and passions, but the manipulator's steady glow gradually outshines them all. Soon, the vastness of the world narrows to the glow of one reliable source. You start to feel that safety and certainty exist only in their presence, and the thought of venturing beyond that familiar light becomes daunting. In many cases, dependency is reinforced by practical arrangements as well. They might control financial resources, orchestrate your daily schedule, or decide whom you interact with. Every choice is couched in concern. I just want what's best for you, or I know you can't handle this on your own. These statements, repeated over time, erase the boundaries of your independence. Your world shrinks until it contains only what they dictate, a controlled environment where your every step is subtly guided. The emotional climate they create is one of perpetual need. When you experience a small setback or feel a twinge of self-doubt, they are there to swoop in with reassurances that reinforce your reliance on them. Instead of empowering you to solve problems on your own, their intervention sends a signal that you cannot manage without their help. The cycle deepens. The more you depend, the less capable you become of acting autonomously, and the more indispensable they appear. This dependency isn't immediately obvious. In the early days, it might be masked by a sense of intense connection and admiration. You might believe that you've found the person who completes you, but as time passes, the veneer fades, revealing an unbalanced power dynamic where your self-worth and decisions are inexorably linked to their approval. You may begin to feel anxious when apart from them, even for a short time, as if a vital part of yourself is missing. The true danger lies in the gradual erosion of your ability to function as an independent individual. When every success feels like it's attributed solely to their influence, and every failure becomes a personal shortcoming exacerbated by their absence, your identity begins to blur. You lose track of your own desires, dreams, and opinions, all subsumed under the weight of their expectations. It's a slow surrender, one that feels almost natural, because the dependency was built through a series of tiny, unremarkable choices that gradually left you defenseless. To break free from this insidious dependency, the first step is to reclaim your autonomy. Start by reconnecting with the interests and people that once made you feel whole. Reflect on your decisions and recognize the moments when your choices were yours alone. It may help to journal your thoughts and revisit memories of times when you thrived independently. Building a support network that validates your individuality can counteract the isolating influence of a controlling partner. Another essential step is to establish clear boundaries. Understand that while support in a relationship is healthy, it must never come at the expense of your independence. Communicate your need for personal space, time with friends, and opportunities to pursue your own goals. Even if the manipulator frames these needs as selfishness, remember that self-care is not only your right, it's a cornerstone of genuine, balanced love. Therapy or counseling can also play a crucial role in rebuilding your sense of self. A neutral perspective can help untangle the complex emotions woven by dependency, allowing you to see the relationship dynamics clearly. With professional guidance, you can learn strategies to assert your independence, re-establish your self-worth, and create a life where love does not require sacrificing who you are. In the end, creating dependency is a tool for control, a way to make you forget that you were once capable of thriving on your own. It's a subtle, gradual process that robs you of your individuality and transforms the vibrant tapestry of your life into a monochrome portrait, defined solely by another's influence. By recognizing this pattern and taking steps to reclaim your independence, you can dismantle the confines of dependency and rediscover the strength that lies within you. You deserve a life where love is shared, not monopolized, a love that celebrates mutual growth rather than stifling your own. The journey back to autonomy might be challenging, but it is also a path to reclaiming your true self, a self that is whole, vibrant, and entirely your own. Shifting blame, always your fault. There's a subtle art in deflecting responsibility, a dance of words that makes you believe you are the constant source of every problem, even when the faults lie elsewhere. This is shifting blame, a tactic where the manipulator systematically transfers accountability onto you, ensuring that every misstep is portrayed as your error, regardless of the true origins. It starts with small inconsistencies, a forgotten commitment, a misinterpreted remark, and before you realize it, you're faced with a barrage of criticisms that leave you questioning your every action. You should have known better, or if you had only done this, we wouldn't be in trouble, becomes the refrain. In these moments, your instincts tell you something is off, yet the repeated insistence chips away at your confidence. Over time, you internalize the notion that you are the root of every discord. In the midst of a heated discussion, the manipulator rarely acknowledges their part. Instead, they focus solely on your perceived shortcomings, magnifying minor mistakes into major faults. They might recall past incidents, selectively chosen and distorted, presenting them as undeniable evidence of your inherent unreliability. The conversation spirals into a monologue, where your voice is reduced to quiet apologies, while their own actions remain unchallenged and unexplored. This relentless deflection creates an environment where you begin to doubt your own memory and judgment. Each time you try to explain or offer context, your explanation is met with, "You always do this," or "That's exactly why you never learn." Soon you start to question whether your recollection of events is flawed, as if your perspective is less valid than theirs. In this psychological tug-of-war, blame becomes a moving target, constantly shifting, ensuring you remain the one to carry the weight of every failure. Shifting blame is particularly damaging because it not only distorts the truth, but it also isolates you. When every conflict is framed as your fault, you grow increasingly hesitant to share your side of the story. Friends or family may begin to echo the same narrative, reinforcing the idea that your role in every disagreement is culpable. This collective doubt erodes your ability to trust your own experiences, leaving you trapped in a cycle of self-blame and perpetual guilt. Over time, the manipulator's method of shifting blame becomes a powerful tool for control. By consistently deflecting responsibility, they avoid confronting their own missteps while keeping you off balance. The imbalance of power intensifies as you become more inclined to apologize, even preemptively, to avoid triggering further accusations. Your sense of self-worth is gradually diminished, replaced by a narrative that suggests you are inherently at fault. In this altered state, you might find yourself accepting blame for things you never intended, simply to restore a semblance of harmony, even if that harmony comes at the expense of your dignity. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward breaking free. It requires a hard look at the dynamics of your interactions, acknowledging that while conflicts are a natural part of any relationship, the persistent redirection of fault is not. Genuine dialogue involves mutual accountability, where both parties reflect on their roles without one dominating the conversation with accusations. In a healthy relationship, mistakes are seen as opportunities for growth, not as ammunition to be used against you in future disputes. To reclaim your narrative, begin by documenting specific instances where blame has been unfairly placed upon you. Writing down these events can help clarify the pattern and reinforce that the issues are not solely your responsibility. Over time, this record can serve as evidence that the cycle of blame is one-sided. Sharing these observations with a trusted friend, mentor, or counselor may offer an external perspective, one that validates your experience and reinforces your right to a balanced conversation. Another essential step is learning to assert your boundaries. When a conversation veers into an unproductive cycle of blame, it's important to pause and express your feelings clearly. "I understand you're upset, but I feel unfairly targeted when every issue is pinned on me without acknowledging what I contributed." Such statements, though they may feel vulnerable at first, assert that you deserve to have your perspective heard. They signal that accountability should be a shared responsibility, not a burden you alone must bear. In many cases, shifting blame is accompanied by an unwillingness to accept constructive criticism from the manipulator. They deflect and distort, ensuring that any feedback becomes another reason to place the fault on you. It's a tactic that turns any attempt at reconciliation into a battleground, leaving you feeling isolated and misunderstood. Recognize that this behavior is less about solving problems and more about maintaining control over the narrative. When you see this pattern for what it is, you can start to detach your self-worth from their constant criticisms. Ultimately, shifting blame is a method designed to keep you off balance and ensure that responsibility never falls where it truly belongs. It's a way for the manipulator to evade accountability while simultaneously undermining your confidence. But you have the power to challenge this dynamic. By asserting your truth, setting clear boundaries, and seeking support from those who see you for who you really are, you reclaim your voice. Remember, you deserve a relationship, be it personal or professional, where errors are shared and lessons are learned collectively, not where the blame is perpetually shifted to you. When you stand firm in your understanding of the situation, you disrupt the cycle. You remind yourself that you are not solely responsible for every misstep, and that true accountability requires both sides to reflect on their actions. Shifting blame might seem insidious, but its hold weakens when confronted with clarity and mutual respect. As you navigate away from this toxic pattern, take heart in the knowledge that your perspective is valid, your memories are worth trusting, and your right to share responsibility is non-negotiable. In reclaiming these truths, you not only break free from the cycle of blame, you also open the door to healthier, more balanced relationships, where every voice is heard and every mistake becomes a stepping stone to growth, rather than a chain that holds you back. False forgiveness. The mask of unreleased pain. They said, "I forgive you, but why does it still feel like you're on trial?" That's not healing. It's false forgiveness, when mercy is used to maintain control. Forgiveness is often seen as a liberating balm, a moment when a wound finally begins to heal. Yet there exists a counterfeit version, a hollow gesture that whispers, "I forgive you," while the memory of the hurt remains unburied and raw. This is false forgiveness, a subtle form of manipulation, where the act of forgiving is performed without truly letting go, serving instead as a tool to maintain control over your emotional landscape. At first, the words "I forgive you" might seem like a promise of a fresh start. They arrive softly, as if wrapped in the delicate language of mercy. But look closer, and you will see that beneath this veneer, the past is never fully released. The abuser, or even a loved one, who seeks to avoid difficult confrontations, might use forgiveness as a way to sidestep responsibility, declaring forgiveness while silently holding on to every slight, every misdeed, as a reminder of your supposed shortcomings. Imagine a scenario where, after a heated argument, instead of engaging in a sincere dialogue to understand and heal the hurt, they casually offer forgiveness with a tone that feels too rehearsed. "I forgive you," they say almost mechanically, as though the heavy burden of pain has been swept away with a single phrase. But in the quiet moments that follow, you notice that nothing has really changed. The unresolved issues linger like shadows in a room that pretends to be bathed in sunlight. The gesture of forgiveness becomes a mask, hiding a deeper refusal to truly move on. False forgiveness leaves you in a limbo, a space where you are expected to carry the memory of the hurt, as if it were a token of your failure. It is as if the phrase "I forgive you" is used not to mend a broken bond, but to reinforce a power dynamic, a reminder that despite the pardon, you are still accountable for every hurt inflicted. You might find yourself revisiting past mistakes, replaying arguments over and over, wondering how you can ever live up to the idea of being forgiven when the wounds remain unhealed. The very act of forgiving, when used insincerely, transforms into a form of emotional debt, a debt that you are made to feel obligated to repay through endless attempts to prove your worth. In relationships, false forgiveness can be a dangerous double-edged sword. It often comes when the other party wants to re-establish a semblance of harmony without actually addressing the root of the conflict. They may say, "I forgive you, but I hope you've learned your lesson," implying that your error is not simply forgiven, but is also a stain that you must forever carry, as a reminder of what went wrong. This sentiment transforms forgiveness into a weapon. It keeps you tethered to your past transgressions, never allowing you to truly embrace the possibility of a fresh start. Consider how false forgiveness affects your inner world. Rather than liberating you, it leaves you feeling trapped by the memory of your mistakes. The unspoken expectation is that you will continue to atone, to prove that you deserve another chance, and that the pain will eventually fade if you work hard enough to erase it. Yet, with every reminder of your past faults, the burden becomes heavier. It's as if the forgiveness was conditional from the start, granted not out of genuine mercy, but as part of a system of control where your behavior is scrutinized and your value is continually questioned. The true peril lies in the subtle, lingering effects. You might begin to doubt your own ability to forgive yourself. When forgiveness is offered falsely, it sends a message that you must always be on guard, that even the act of being pardoned does not cleanse the stain of your past. You may become overly cautious, constantly measuring your actions against an impossible standard set by someone who never really let go of their hurt. The cycle of false forgiveness ensures that you remain in a state of perpetual self-examination and remorse, never fully free to move forward. Breaking free from the chains of false forgiveness requires a deep, honest reckoning with your emotions. It begins by acknowledging that true forgiveness is more than a simple phrase. It is a process of releasing the grip of past pain. Real forgiveness comes from understanding, accepting, and then gradually letting go of the hurt. It is an internal journey, one that demands that you validate your own feelings, seek clarity, and when necessary, establish boundaries to prevent old wounds from reopening. You might find it helpful to reflect on specific instances where forgiveness was offered, yet the pain remained. Journaling can be a powerful tool here. Write down your recollections, the emotions that followed, and how those moments impacted your sense of self. Over time, this practice can help you distinguish between gestures of sincere forgiveness and those that serve to keep you in a state of unresolved tension. Equally important is seeking support from others who can offer a more objective perspective. Whether it's a trusted friend, a counselor, or a support group, external validation can remind you that true forgiveness should be liberating. When others affirm your worth, independent of past mistakes, it becomes easier to see that false forgiveness is merely a facade, a tactic designed to keep you accountable to a narrative that isn't in your best interest. Remember that you deserve a space where forgiveness is genuine, a space where reconciliation comes with mutual understanding and an earnest desire to grow together. True forgiveness is freeing. It doesn't bind you to the memory of past wrongs, but allows you to move forward with confidence and self-compassion. In contrast, false forgiveness leaves you perpetually on the defensive, always striving to prove that you can be better, even when you've already done your best. In the end, recognizing false forgiveness is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional freedom. When someone's pardon feels hollow or is laced with conditions, trust your intuition. Know that you are not defined by your past errors, nor should you be shackled by a forgiveness that comes with strings attached. By seeking out relationships where apologies are sincere and where mistakes are met with empathy rather than judgment, you can begin to heal and ultimately find a way to forgive yourself in a manner that truly sets you free. Over-apologizing. The weight of, "I'm always at fault." Every "I'm sorry" chips away at you, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've been taught to believe you always do. This is over-apologizing, the silent erosion of self-worth. Over-apologizing is more than a habit. It's a subtle form of self-erasure that often stems from, or is exploited by, manipulation. It's the constant refrain of, "I'm sorry" that over time transforms from a sincere expression of regret into a deeply ingrained belief that you are inherently flawed. At first, a quick apology might seem like a polite response in a moment of tension, a way to smooth over a minor mistake. However, when apologies become habitual, they start to warp your perception of yourself. You find yourself saying, "I'm sorry" even when nothing is wrong, as if you're trying to preempt any possibility of criticism. This chronic self-blame can create a feedback loop. The more you apologize, the more you internalize the notion that you are always at fault, which in turn makes you feel even more obligated to say sorry. In some relationships, this behavior isn't accidental, it's a tool of control. A partner or authority figure might consistently provoke you into apologizing, using your repeated contrition as a way to reinforce their power over you. They might say things like, "I can't believe you're so irresponsible," or "You always mess things up," leaving you to assume that you're the root cause of all conflict. Over time, you start to believe that your very nature is defective. The narrative becomes, if you're always apologizing, it must mean you're always doing something wrong. And so your identity shifts. Your self-worth becomes entangled with an endless cycle of remorse. This perpetual state of apology can have profound psychological effects. When you're constantly apologizing, you begin to doubt your own judgment and diminish your own needs. Instead of advocating for yourself, you instinctively defer to others, believing that any assertion of your own opinion might lead to further blame. The result is a kind of learned helplessness, where you expect criticism before you even have a chance to speak. Your inner dialogue transforms into a litany of "I'm sorries," each one a quiet surrender to the idea that you're undeserving of respect. Over-apologizing can also isolate you from genuine support. Friends or colleagues might start to mirror this behavior, or they might become frustrated by the constant need for reassurance. Instead of engaging in healthy dialogue about mistakes and growth, interactions devolve into a pattern where every misstep is met with immediate self-condemnation. The environment becomes one where vulnerability is not celebrated, but is a trigger for further self-flagellation. In such a setting, even when you try to correct a situation, your apology is taken as confirmation of your inadequacy, rather than a constructive step toward resolution. The origins of chronic over-apologizing are often complex. It might arise from early experiences where your feelings were dismissed or punished, teaching you that conflict is dangerous and that maintaining harmony requires you to constantly check yourself. Alternatively, it might be the result of manipulative dynamics in a current relationship, where someone deliberately encourages you to be overly contrite as a means of keeping you submissive. Regardless of the source, the impact remains the same. You start to see your worth only in relation to how much you're willing to grovel for acceptance. To break free from the cycle of over-apologizing, it's essential to first recognize that apologies should be reserved for genuine missteps, not used as a default response to every minor interaction. Begin by pausing before you speak. Ask yourself, am I truly at fault here, or am I preemptively assuming blame? Building this awareness can be challenging, especially when the habit is deeply ingrained, but it's a crucial step toward reclaiming your autonomy. Another vital strategy is to rebuild your self-esteem through positive affirmation. Reflect on your accomplishments and the times when you stood by your own convictions. Surround yourself with people who value your opinions and encourage you to express yourself without fear of undue criticism. Professional counseling or therapy can provide tools to challenge the internal narrative that you are always in the wrong. A therapist might help you explore the origins of your tendency to apologize excessively and guide you in setting healthier boundaries. In relationships, assertiveness is key. Communicate your feelings openly and clearly, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. When someone criticizes you, try to engage in a dialogue rather than immediately saying sorry. For instance, you might say, "I hear what you're saying, and I'd like to understand it better," instead of defaulting to an apology. This not only shows that you're willing to address issues constructively, but also reinforces the idea that you deserve to have your perspective respected. Moreover, challenge any external messages that reinforce your habit of over-apologizing. If a partner, friend, or co-worker constantly emphasizes your supposed faults, recognize that this is not an objective truth, but rather a reflection of their own need for control or their limited perspective. Learn to accept that while constructive feedback is valuable, it should never erode your fundamental sense of self-worth. Over time, as you practice these strategies, you may begin to notice a shift. The reflex to apologize ceases to be automatic and becomes a conscious choice. With each instance of standing your ground, you reinforce the idea that your voice matters, that you are not defined solely by your mistakes. This gradual reclaiming of your narrative can empower you to engage in relationships that are balanced and respectful, where apologies are shared mutually in the spirit of growth, rather than wielded as a weapon of self-doubt. In summary, over-apologizing is a corrosive habit that, whether developed independently or imposed by others, can trap you in a cycle of self-blame and diminished self-worth. True accountability should foster growth, not constant self-criticism. By learning to distinguish between genuine remorse and habitual contrition, and by reinforcing your own value, you can break the cycle of perpetual apology. In doing so, you pave the way for relationships and interactions where mutual respect triumphs over unwarranted guilt, a world where your inherent worth is recognized, and you are free to express yourself without the incessant burden of "I'm always at fault." Isolation from support system, cutting off your safety net. They said your friends were toxic, your family didn't get you, And now, they're all gone, and the only voice left is theirs. That's not love. That's isolation by design. Imagine a world where every familiar voice, every comforting presence, gradually fades into silence. A world where the people who once celebrated your successes and lifted you during hard times are slowly pushed away. This is isolation from your support system, a tactic designed to sever the lifelines that keep you grounded in reality. It isn't about a sudden dramatic exile, it's a subtle, almost imperceptible withdrawal of connection, one that leaves you feeling increasingly alone, even when you're surrounded by others. In the early stages, it might begin with small, seemingly innocent suggestions. Maybe you don't need to spend so much time with them, or they don't really understand you like I do. At first, these comments appear caring, an effort to protect you from unsupportive influences. But over time, these seeds of doubt blossom into a larger strategy of control. The manipulator deliberately undermines your existing relationships, isolating you from friends, family, and even colleagues who once provided a sense of balance and perspective. The gradual process is both clever and insidious. You might notice that social gatherings become fewer, that your invitations from long-time friends are subtly declined or never returned, and that your once vibrant network starts to shrink. The isolator may initiate conflicts, spread misinformation, or simply portray those close to you as unreliable, untrustworthy, or even hostile. Their aim is not to confront these relationships head-on, but to erode your trust in them slowly, until you come to see them as liabilities, rather than sources of support. Isolation is a potent method for deepening dependency. When you're cut off from those who provide an external reality check, your reliance on the manipulator grows. Their opinions begin to dominate your thoughts, and soon you find yourself questioning your own judgments. The absence of a supportive network leaves you vulnerable to doubt and self-criticism. Without the comforting counterbalance of honest feedback, every decision and every misstep can feel amplified, a constant reminder that you're alone in facing the challenges of life. This enforced solitude often comes with emotional consequences that are hard to articulate. You might start feeling a gnawing emptiness, a sense that something vital is missing. There's an underlying anxiety that grows as the people who once anchored you to a broader, more compassionate world disappear. The isolation can lead to a cycle where your self-esteem diminishes. You may begin to believe that you deserve to be alone, or that you're incapable of sustaining meaningful connections on your own. In many cases, isolation is not abrupt but a slow, steady erosion of your social ties. It can manifest in subtle shifts, an unreturned phone call, a friend's vague excuse for canceling plans, a family member who seems increasingly distant. Over time, these small rejections accumulate until they form a wall around you, blocking out voices that once encouraged your individuality. The manipulator capitalizes on this void, stepping in as your primary or even sole source of validation. And as that dependency deepens, your world narrows until it consists only of what they allow you to see. The long-term impact of such isolation can be profound. Without a diverse network of perspectives, your ability to challenge the narrative imposed on you becomes severely compromised. You might start accepting the manipulator's version of reality as the only truth, dismissing any external advice or criticism as misguided or jealous. This self-imposed seclusion reinforces the power imbalance. You become so entangled in their web that it feels nearly impossible to extricate yourself. Breaking free from isolation requires conscious effort and the courage to rebuild connections, even when the manipulative influence has deeply altered your social landscape. It begins with recognizing the pattern, the realization that the relationships you once valued have been systematically undermined. Once you identify this, the first step is to reach out. Even if it feels risky, reconnecting with a trusted friend, a supportive family member, or even a counselor can help re-anchor you to a reality that exists outside the confines of the isolator's control. Rebuilding your support system might mean taking small, tentative steps. It could involve joining groups where people share similar interests, engaging in community activities, or simply making the effort to call an old friend. As you start to open up again, you may discover that the world beyond the manipulator is richer and more diverse than you'd imagined. These renewed connections can remind you that your worth isn't measured solely by one person's approval, and that genuine relationships are built on mutual respect, empathy, and freedom. Moreover, establishing clear boundaries is essential. It might mean limiting contact with the person who has isolated you, or even, in some cases, stepping away entirely from the relationship until you can regain your footing. Setting boundaries is not about pushing people away, but about reclaiming the right to a balanced and supportive network. It's a declaration that you value your own voice and that you deserve to have a safety net of diverse perspectives that can help you navigate life's challenges. Therapy can also be a powerful tool in overcoming isolation. A skilled counselor can help you understand the psychological mechanisms that led to your seclusion, guide you in rebuilding your self-esteem, and support you in creating a healthier, more connected life. Professional help offers not only a fresh perspective, but also a safe space to process the feelings of loneliness and betrayal that often accompany isolation. In the end, isolation from your support system is a strategy designed to make you doubt your own value by stripping away the voices that affirm your worth. It's a silent, creeping process that leaves you more dependent on the very person who initiated it, while simultaneously eroding the diverse, supportive network that makes life resilient. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward reclaiming your autonomy. You deserve a life where your relationships uplift you, where criticism is balanced by compassion, and where your social connections are as diverse as they are supportive. As you gradually dismantle the barriers that have confined you, remember that reaching out is not a sign of weakness, it's an act of strength. Each call you make, each friend you reconnect with, reinforces your inherent right to belong and to be seen. You are not meant to navigate life in isolation. Your voice, your thoughts and your feelings are meant to be shared, celebrated and validated by those who care about you. The journey back from isolation might be challenging, but every step you take towards reconnecting with the world is a reclaiming of your power, a reminder that your worth extends far beyond the confines of any one relationship. In rediscovering your support system, you rebuild a foundation for a richer, more resilient life where your authenticity is honored and your connections are genuine. Gaslight by praise. You're amazing, but you've never felt so seen, so valued. Compliments poured in like warm rain, until they didn't. Now every kind word comes with a correction, every praise with a condition. You're brilliant, but you need to be more humble. You're beautiful, but you shouldn't wear that. This is gaslighting by praise, a manipulation tactic that disguises control as affirmation. It begins innocently, with genuine-sounding compliments designed to draw you in. But over time, these praises become the sugarcoating for criticism, and the praise itself becomes a tool for reshaping your identity. The process starts with idealization. The manipulator showers you with adoration, highlighting your best qualities and making you feel extraordinary. In this phase, praise feels unconditional, almost intoxicating. You're told you're smart, talented, attractive, kind, everything they could ever want. This praise activates your sense of self-worth and creates a deep emotional bond as you begin to trust their perception of you more than your own. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone begins to shift. Compliments become contingent. You're still amazing, but now only when you behave in specific ways. You're still beautiful, but only when you follow their preferences. This conditional praise creates confusion. You want to return to the feeling of being unconditionally loved, so you start adjusting your behavior to meet their new, unspoken standards. The subtlety of gaslighting by praise lies in its plausible deniability. If you express discomfort or call out the manipulator can deflect. What are you talking about? I just told you how amazing you are. This makes you question your own judgment. Are you being overly sensitive? Are you misinterpreting their words? The result is a deepening reliance on the manipulator for validation and a growing mistrust of your own instincts. This tactic can be especially insidious because it preys on your desire for connection and affirmation. Everyone wants to be seen and appreciated, but when praise is used to reinforce control or create insecurity, it becomes a weapon. You may find yourself constantly striving to be the version of yourself they admire, afraid to express your true thoughts or preferences for fear of losing their approval. Gaslighting by praise is also an effective way to isolate you from external feedback. If the manipulator has positioned themselves as your biggest fan and harshest critic, then other perspectives, whether from friends, family, or even your own reflections, begin to lose their influence. You might dismiss compliments from others as less meaningful, or view their concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. The manipulator becomes the sole mirror through which you view yourself. Over time, this dynamic erodes your confidence and blurs your self-image. You may feel like you're constantly being evaluated, unsure of where you stand. One day, you're everything they've ever wanted. The next, you've disappointed them in some unspoken way. The inconsistency creates anxiety and a compulsive need to please. You may begin editing yourself in anticipation of criticism wrapped in kindness. Breaking free from gaslighting by praise requires reclaiming your internal sense of worth. It means learning to separate genuine affirmation from manipulation. Ask yourself, does this compliment empower me, or does it make me doubt myself? Is it uplifting, or is it a way to control my choices? Recognizing the pattern is the first step toward recovery. Start by reconnecting with voices outside the manipulator's echo chamber. Friends, family, mentors, people who see you clearly and accept you without condition. Reflect on the compliments they've given you, ones that didn't come with a catch. Revisit your own accomplishments, talents, and values. Relearn the ability to appreciate yourself without needing someone else's approval. Therapy can also be a powerful tool in this journey. A trained therapist can help you identify the subtle ways praise has been weaponized against you and assist you in rebuilding your self-esteem. Together, you can unpack the belief systems that made you vulnerable to this manipulation and develop strategies for setting boundaries and affirming your identity. Most importantly, remind yourself that love and praise should not feel like a performance review. You are not a project to be constantly improved or corrected. True affirmation celebrates you as you are, not as someone else wants you to be. Gaslighting by praise often leaves its victims confused because the words sound kind, but the impact is disorienting. It's okay to feel unsettled even when the delivery seems sweet. Trust that feeling. Your emotions are valid indicators of how you're being treated, even if the surface appears smooth. In time, as you rebuild your self-trust, you'll start to recognize the difference between genuine encouragement and manipulative flattery. You'll come to see that the most powerful praise is the kind that aligns with your truth, not someone else's vision for who you should be. You deserve to be seen and appreciated for who you truly are, not for how well you fit into someone else's mold. Your worth isn't conditional, it's inherent, whole, and yours to reclaim.